Bong bong.
Both y'all niggas gonna get clapped up when I get back. Both of y'all niggas.
Hello friends and welcome back to ReddX, your source for the freshest daily Reddit content anywhere on the internet. Promise, swearsies, it's just a fact, and it's totally science. I beg you, just go ahead, look it up. Today, our content is not quite so fresh, but it is one of the top rated, actually it is the top rated saga ever posted on r/NeckbeardStories. It is the WOLFBEARD Saga from Madame Macabre. And you might be able to tell from the length of this video that I did cram the whole thing into just one video, so you're welcome in advance. It has been highly requested, and after my Valentine's Day compilation debacle, I'm a little bit scared to post it in separate parts. So we'll just shove it all into this video. Hopefully it does pretty well. I did have Kate, one of my subscribers, do the voice for Miss Piggy. As a slight addendum, Kate did want me to give a shout out to her mother, Hedgie. So, what up, Hedgie? How's it going? So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. And maybe we'll bring her back for some more stuff in the future. So we will delay no longer. We'll get those plugs and warnings out of the way, and then we will jump right into the WOLFBEARD Saga. WOLFBEARD, enter the saga. Hello there, I'm new to Reddit, and I haven't really shared much yet, but after stumbling across this subreddit, I realize I might actually have something worth sharing here. I apologize in advance for the length of this, but let's just say that a lot has happened. Several years ago, I lived through a series of horrifying and hilarious events with a beard in the wild. At the time, everything I was put through was rather overwhelming and even scary at times, but now I can look back on it and laugh. I hope you get a chuckle out of it too. So without further ado, I give you the first tale of WOLFBEARD. I call him such because of his unhealthy obsession with wolves. He was one of those guys that collected just about anything with artwork of wolves on it. Shirts, blankets, tapestries, you name it. His obsession went beyond this even, but let's not get ahead of ourselves in this story just yet. I met WOLFBEARD in my freshman year of university. At the time, he was engaged to my ex-childhood friend. My friends and I have taken to calling her Miss Piggy these days, so we'll use that name for this story. Miss Piggy was your classic legbeard, morbidly obese, lacking proper social boundaries, and an extreme weeaboo extraordinaire. What ultimately ended my friendship with Miss Piggy was some downright vile and crazy stuff she did to a mutual friend of ours, and when I found out, I finally had enough and cut ties with her, but really that warrants a story of its own. Needless to say, while all the shenanigans with WOLFBEARD went down, she and I were still tentative friends. Despite this though, we had actually grown a bit distant at this time. When I was much younger, I lived in the same town as Miss Piggy. She wasn't always a full-blown legbeard. Maybe it's the nostalgia glasses kicking in, but in my younger childhood years, I remember her being around the same build as me, slender and on the taller side, and despite being a little socially awkward, because who wasn't in their childhood years, she was a super sweet and funny girl. We'd been friends since kindergarten. Yeah man, those hormones kick in, they'll mess you up. However, when the time came for us to attend middle school, my family moved away to a new town. It was only about a half an hour away, but for a child that was too young to drive, it might as well have been states away. Because of this, we naturally started to drift apart. We only saw each other rarely, and our interests and lives had changed a lot. However, once finished with primary school and off at university with a license and car of my own, I decided to change this. With a vehicle, the 30-minute distance was nothing, so I began reaching out to her in an attempt to rekindle our old friendship. And in doing so, I ended up meeting WOLFBEARD. At the time, Miss Piggy and WOLFBEARD had been living together in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. Interestingly enough, both of their parents had been against the idea, as they didn't believe either one of them was ready for that kind of responsibility. Given the possible alternative of having a 30-year-old living in your basement, I'd let him go. That's fine. Live your life, make some mistakes. And of course, the parents were correct, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The apartment was in one of those sketchy complexes that you really don't want to get caught in after dark. The place was a dump, and the air was constantly filled with a cacophony of unsupervised children terrorizing the neighborhood, and white trash couples screaming at each other and slamming furniture around. I almost turned around on the spot before making it to Miss Piggy's apartment, but I had been the one to make plans to meet up, so I strengthened my resolve and knocked on their scuffed and dented door. I should also mention that she had not told me about Wolfbeard before now, let alone mention that they were living together, so I almost backpedaled on the spot when a tall, greasy-haired man opened the door instead of my friend. Wolfbeard was a big man, and I mean that in every sense of the word. He was tall, easily around 6'1" or 6'2", as well as morbidly obese. He nearly filled the entire door frame, blocking the apartment within from my view. He had dirty blonde hair, and although he lacked the true neck beard, he had a very poorly trimmed splotch of scruff right on his chin that made him appear as though Shaggy from Scooby-Doo had really let himself go. He wore an oversized t-shirt with a print of 2 wolves howling at the moon, and one of those flat golf caps atop his clearly unwashed hair. But what was most off-putting about this imposing figure was his smell. His chapped lips pulled into a smile, revealing plaque-encrusted teeth, and a wave of horrific odor blasted my face. Oh god. Vomit-inducing as this was, it didn't even hold a candle to his body odor. In all my time knowing Wolfbeard, I don't think he ever once grasped the concept of deodorant. You could always smell him coming before you would see him, and with someone his size, that was really saying something. Before I could scuttle away, Piggy walked up and pushed Wolfbeard out of the way so she could greet me.
Oh, sorry about that. I forgot to mention it to you. This is Wolfbeard. He's my fiancé.
She squealed in delight, forcing a pudgy hand into my face to show off one of those etched rune-looking rings that you can find at Spencer's or Hot Topic. Don't break the bank, Wolfbeard. A little overwhelmed and caught off guard, I congratulated her before entering the apartment. When I got inside, I had to stop myself from almost retching again. You see, Piggy had always been a bit of a hoarder, even since we were children, but time had certainly not helped this habit. And what's worse, Wolfbeard was a lazy slob who had previously relied on his mother to clean up after him, so his mess just compounded the problem. The whole place smelled vaguely of garbage and cat piss. Oh god. The entire living room set was just made up of a couch, coffee table, and a massive television that Wolfbeard had brought with him from his parents' house. Both the couch and the coffee table were piled with clothes, garbage, and who knows what else. Insects, probably. You could really feel the impact of the clutter, as the unit truly was tiny. In entirety, the apartment unit was laid out in a linear line, one room connected to the next. It consisted of the front living room, then moved into the kitchen and dining space. The kitchen was pretty narrow and seemed even worse than it really was, as the mountain of unwashed dishes coated in rotting food took up what little counter space there was. And crammed opposite of this was a table that was functionally useless due to the mountain of crap piled atop it. Continuing our glum tour, we have the piece de resistance, the single bedroom and connected bathroom. Based on the descriptions of the rest of the unit, I'll let you use your imagination as to the state of this tiny, overstuffed room and the smell which emanated from it. Needless to say, the apartment was disgusting. And it only added to my general feeling of uneasiness during the visit. From the very beginning, Wolfbeard made me incredibly uncomfortable. Despite supposedly being engaged to Piggy, from the moment I entered the apartment, he was eyeing me like a piece of meat. For this thrilling saga, we'll refer to myself as Calamity, my usual D&D moniker, which seems appropriate given that this whole experience felt more like a wildly crafted fantasy than actual reality. While I'm by no means a supermodel, I do try to put a bit of effort into my appearance. I'm rather busty despite being slender, and am quite tall, a little over 5'8". My friends often make Amazon warrior jokes at me, but I just threaten to crush their skulls like a sparrow egg. I also love all things horror and occult, so naturally I'm into a witchy alternative style and love to dress in dark makeup and clothes. Oftentimes this puts off or spooks away potential creeps, which is great, but in Wolfbeard's case, it made me appear as some sort of tantalizing mystery that he desperately wanted to unwrap. He delusionally fancied himself an old-fashioned Gothic-type gentleman, and the dark milady before him all but begged for a gallant protector such as himself. Anyways, after bulldozing some of the crap off the couch, Wolfbeard made a sweeping motion to gesture Piggy and I to take a seat. Upon reluctantly doing so, I was dismayed to find Wolfbeard planting himself on the ground next to me rather than his fiancée. He leaned back on the couch, uncomfortably close to me. Despite the discomfort of his looming presence, eventually my nose went blind to the lingering cloud of stench, and I was actually able to enjoy catching up with Miss Piggy. Despite having become even more awkward and overly invested in anime, she still seemed to be pretty much the same person from all those years ago, and chatting with her was fun. It was odd, though, as every so often, Piggy and Wolfbeard would have these strange little exchanges. Wolfbeard would frown and grasp his chest dramatically for a moment, or briefly clutch his head in his hands before shooting a dire look at Miss Piggy. In turn, she'd paste a worried expression on her face and extend a gentle hand as if to reassure him that everything was all right. I didn't know what was going on, and I assumed that it was a weird couples thing between them, so I just tried my best to ignore it. That is, until right around nightfall. Noticing the sky beginning to darken, Wolfbeard dramatically stood up and waddled to the window. Once again, he dramatically grasped his chest and violently whipped his head away. At this, Piggy shot up from the couch and bounded over to him, clutching onto him like a pose from an old romance novel. Confused, I watched the scene beginning to unfold before me.
Are you going to be alright, my love?
Miss Piggy softly cooed, looking over her shoulder out into the night air beyond the window.
It's a full moon tonight,
Wolfbeard hoarsely croaked in response, dramatically turning away from her.
You can't control it. I know you can.
Piggy warbled, clutching him tighter still.
I should go, just to be safe,
Wolfbeard whispered back. At this, he strode through the apartment in an almost slow-motion fashion. I imagine he thought he looked really epic or something, but in reality, he just looked like some kind of wounded animal, hauling itself back into its den to die. Upon reaching the door, he paused in the frame, looked out at me sadly, and then with a sigh, closed the door behind him. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, what the hell is going on? And that's when Piggy comes up to me with a direly serious look on her face.
Calamity, I need to tell you a secret. Do you promise not to tell anyone? Wolfbeard's life could be endangered if you spread this around, so please take it seriously.
I paused, not sure what other horrors could possibly be awaiting me that evening, but the curiosity got the better of me, so I hesitantly agreed.
Wolfbeard, he is a lichen.
I sat, positively bamboozled, blinking furiously as my brain tried to process the sheer stupidity that this grown-ass woman had just thrown my way. Mistaking this for me not understanding, she continued.
A lichen is what most people would call a werewolf.
You're telling me that Wolfbeard is a werewolf? I repeated slowly, in one last-ditch effort to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding some sort of joke or prank that they were pulling on me.
Yes,
Piggy whispered, no hint of humor on her face.
Usually, he can restrain himself pretty well, but tonight is a full moon, so he's afraid he could lose control since he has to transform.
It honestly took every ounce of self-restraint within my body not to just burst out laughing on the spot. I couldn't tell at the time, and I still don't know to this day if it was just some weird socially awkward game the two of them played together, or if she genuinely believed him. But either way, what ensued was positively wild. Miss Piggy proceeded to tell me the tale of how she had learned Wolfbeard's oh-so-dark secret back in high school, and how they had fallen in love because she had learned to tame the beast in his heart. Mind you, while all of this is going on, Wolfbeard had started making these ridiculous growling noises and knocking things about in the closed-off bedroom. After a few minutes of this, I could hear the sound of a window sliding and a resounding thud, At this, Miss Piggy hurriedly led me back alongside her to investigate. I should clarify, they lived on the ground floor. The bedroom had one large window that lacked a screen and opened directly into the parking lot. Well, lo and behold, when Piggy and I arrived at the bedroom, the window was open, and there was no sign of our dashing lycanthropic gentle sir. Oh no, alert the townsfolk. At this point, I had reached my quota for how much bullshit I can handle in one evening. So I used the excuse of needing to get back to my dorm for school the following day to just take my leave. I told Miss Piggy how nice it was to catch up with her, and that WOLFBEARD's secret was safe with me, and I quickly gathered my things. However, as I neared the front door, before I could reach it, it burst open. Standing in the doorway was WOLFBEARD once more, now panting wildly and dripping with sweat. If I thought he smelled bad before, he was now positively noxious. He also had what looked like some dirt quickly rubbed onto his forearms, as if meant to convince me that he'd been out terrorizing the countryside in the 5 minutes that he'd been out of the apartment. I love it. Feeding into his delusion, Miss Piggy ran into his arms and coddled him like he had just escaped a harrowing experience. She asked him if his transformation was painful, and he just pathetically nodded in response. Turning to me with what I imagine he thought was collected coolness, he ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair and addressed me.
I hope I didn't scare you, Calamity. I know I can get a little primal in this moon phase.
Oh no, Miss Piggy told me you know how to control yourself, I responded, knowing damn well that it wasn't good to play into their game, but honestly not knowing how else to end this situation. Well, it was great meeting you, but I got classes in the morning, so I'm gonna take off now, I quickly spouted, before he had a chance to start up some new element to the game. At this, he held out his sweaty, stinking, dirt-encrusted arms, as if expecting me to hug him. There was quite possibly nothing else on this earth that I wanted to do less than hug WOLFBEARD, to be honest, so I was quick to dodge him and blame it on not wanting the dirt on his arms to get onto my clothes. His response to this was to literally throw his shoulders down and pout like an overgrown toddler, and with 100% seriousness and no irony, say,
"Sad panda."
Oh, grade A weirdo, dude. Damn. It seemed to become a passionate mission of WOLFBEARD's to try and get as close to me and touch me as much as he physically could anytime I was near over the encounters to come. And believe it or not, this evening wasn't even the worst of my encounters with him. Oh no. Despite being engaged, WOLFBEARD would soon decide that he wanted much more than just friendship with yours truly. But that is another story to come. God. These neckbeards that seem to think they're werewolves are like a dime a dozen. Who is manufacturing these people? What has happened in their life that they are like this? My God, so classic. Sad panda.
Sad werewolf.
I love that. He didn't want to stay outside for more than 5 minutes. He's like, I got a TV in there. I don't want to pretend any longer than I have to. I mean, in the end, at least he found somebody who's gonna put up with his shit, but look at him, what a scumbag, just trying to jump ship immediately. You found a legbeard that's buying into your shit, just stick with the legbeard. Everything's gonna be fine. But everything's not gonna be fine, because we have many more parts to go, so I will not hesitate any longer. We'll go ahead and jump into the next story. WOLFBEARD returns, the wounded beast. Oh no. Somebody wounded him, a hunter. Hello everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the warm welcome that you all gave me on my first entry. I was genuinely amazed how many of you enjoyed the story and wanted to hear more. So ask, and you shall receive. Today's entry is one of drama, suspense, non-reciprocal feelings, and a rejection-fueled temper tantrum of beardly proportions, in the way that only a neckbeard can. And with that, let us begin. Since my fate-altering encounter with the
Mighty werewolf.
I'd consciously made an effort to try and make plans to meet up with Miss Piggy in neutral locations, or whenever Wolfbeard was away. Of course, it wasn't always possible to avoid him. When it came to me being in the general vicinity of his town, he was like a damn truffle pig, catching my scent in the wind. He had the most uncanny ability to somehow sense my presence and just materialize in said location as if by magic. God, he's hunting you, OP. Maybe he is part werewolf. Let's not write it off quite yet. Miss Piggy and I are out to lunch.
Oh wow, what are you two doing here? What a coincidence. Mind if I join you?
Miss Piggy invites me to come over and hang out at her apartment while Wolfbeard is supposed to be working until 6.
Oh wow, I just happened to get off work early again. What are the odds I'd find you here? Don't mind if I do join in on the girls' day.
It's gotta be tracking her phone or something like that. Something weird. Now mind you, if his work situation were anything otherwise, I genuinely might believe that this were a coincidence. However, Wolfbeard worked for his wealthy father, so basically, whenever he felt like being done with work for the day, he was done. And he always decided that he was done when I just so happened to be at their apartment. I genuinely tried, you guys. I tried so damn hard to be friendly to this man because he was going to be marrying my childhood friend. But god damn, did he make it hard. There were only so many excuses I could accept for his blatantly creepy and downright inappropriate behavior before I came to the inevitable conclusion that I would just never feel comfortable around this person, and that I needed to at least try and warn and protect Miss Piggy from what I could only see as what will become a disaster of a marriage and a broken heart. Now, before anyone gets too far into thinking, oh gee, Calamity, he may be feeding Miss Piggy the delusion of him being a literal werewolf, but that's hardly hurting her, and doesn't warrant trying to interfere with the future marriage. I get you, fam. If that was it, I'd let them play Princess Mononoke into the sunset. No. What bothered me enough to try and talk this woman out of an engagement was the blatant attempt to cheat on her right before her very eyes. Somewhere along the way, Wolfbeard had decided that
he was never really in love with Miss Piggy.
I would find this out later from word of his very own mouth. But early on, it was apparent that he had decided I would be the new object of his desire, whether I returned that sentiment or not. We're talking about a man that growled at dogs passing in the streets and dramatically clutched his heart whenever anyone spoke of nighttime or the moon. He was clearly a true master of subtlety. Killing me. All sarcasm aside, Wolfbeard blatantly began attempting to
put the moves on me.
About 3 visits in. Anytime I was over, he'd always go out of his way to get as physically close to me as possible. Like, take as small as you're willing to allow your personal bubble to shrink, and shrink it about 3 more inches. Okay? Got it? Now imagine the person invading said bubble being significantly larger than you, looming so near that you can feel their hot, rotten breath on your neck. Ugh. And catch every whiff of their potent body odor. Oh god, stop. Their large, moist arms occasionally brush you due to standing so close, and to make sure you're getting an ample dose of their sweat, they squeeze your arm or your waist with their large, soggy hand every other word. It's gotta be so hard being a woman, dude. I hate this. I can't do it. But wait, there's more! Most importantly, you can't forget that since they loom over you so, they're in a perfect position to blatantly stare down your shirt at your cleavage at all times that they think your eyes are not directly on them. Uncomfortable yet? I was uncomfortable 2 sentences in. I'm sorry, my brave soldiers, but we've only just begun, and the war has many horrors yet to come. Oh god. Alongside Wolfbeard's frequent soggy squeezes, he liked to try his hand at sweet talking. He'd constantly say things like,
"You'll make some man very happy someday, and I envy the lucky bastard,"
and
"Goth chicks are the sexiest."
But his all-time favorite poetics to fall back on were extremely uncomfortable comments directed regarding my body. He'd scan me up and down with his greedy little pinpoint eyes and say things like,
"Oh, girl, your tits look spectacular in that shirt."
Or,
"Honey, that top shows off all the right curves."
"Girl and honey? Are we sure Wolfbeard's not a gay man?" The wildest part to this is that he would make those vulgar comments in the most ridiculously effeminate voice. Oh, see? Possibly while wobbling his head back and forth and snapping his wrists, as if he thought mocking the most over-the-top stereotype of a gay man made it a funny joke that was totally appropriate and a-okay to not only say to my face, but in the presence of his own fiancé. So how do we combine the neckbeard and the gay voice? Man. "Honey, that top shows off all the right curves."
"Honey, that top shows off all the right curves."
I don't know if it works. But perhaps the wildest thing of all was that Miss Piggy was not only alright with these behaviors, but actually defended them. That's right. The few times that I had alone with her, I blatantly told her how uncomfortable Wolfbeard made me, and that she shouldn't put up with him openly flirting with other women because she was worth more than that. But she'd always counter with,
"But he's only joking.
and
He doesn't mean to come off as creepy, but he's just trying to be friendly."
basically for every concern I raised, she had an excuse prepared and at the ready. So, after going back and forth with Miss Piggy countless times about it, I finally accepted that if she wanted to marry a creep that openly ogled other women and would without a doubt cheat on her the very second an opportunity presented itself, then she would. As much as I cared about the well-being of Miss Piggy's heart after rekindling our old friendship, I also recognized a lost cause when I saw one, and I had to accept that it was not my circus, and this was not my sweaty, unkempt monkey. So my compromise was simple. I would stop bringing it up to Miss Piggy, but I did not want to be around Wolfbeard whenever humanly possible. Despite how she defended him, I fiercely maintained how uncomfortable he made me, and to my surprise, Miss Piggy actually agreed. So over the next couple of weeks, when I saw Miss Piggy, she either came over to my place, or we met somewhere outside of her town, and seemingly outside Wolfbeard's sphere of influence. And honestly, it was fantastic. The uncomfortable aura of hungry eyes boring into me was finally gone, so I was able to truly enjoy just catching up on lost time with my friend. It was hugely apparent that our interests had become widely different, but as we spent the majority of our time simply filling each other in on how our lives, families, and towns have changed over the years, this really wasn't a problem. I did start to notice a disturbing theme, however, of every cringy change or harebrained ill-advised decision that she had made over time since high school had somehow linked back to Wolfbeard's influence in one way or another. That being said, those brief few weeks of reprieve were just the calm before the storm. Oh no. Summer quarter had just rolled around, and since I wasn't taking any classes then, it was my vacation. This meant I went back home to my parents' place that was much closer to Miss Piggy, and I also had a lot more free time. Taking advantage of this new spare time, Piggy invited me over to her place for the first time in weeks. I was obviously apprehensive about it, but agreed when she assured me that Wolfbeard would indeed be gone the whole weekend, as he was on a camping trip with his father. I was also a bit easier to warm up at this point as well, because another friend of mine agreed to come with, and who doesn't love introducing their old and new friends? The more the merrier, right? Maybe. The other friend, who I'll call Lilith, also her D&D moniker, guess I'll be sticking with the nickname theme, is still one of my best friends to this day. We met after I moved from my old town, and we rode through the absolute wilderness that was our edgy high school emo years together. You get through that kind of shit together, and you'll either want to forget the other one ever existed, or you'll be blood brothers for life. We're both grown-ass adults now, who practically live in replicas of the Addams family home though, so maybe the phase never entirely left us or didn't hit us hard. Like a slow burn that permanently infected us. But yeah, I digress. We're a couple of spooky badass bitches that ride or die together. Bong bong. And goddamn if Wolfbeard didn't make us ride through hell. So Lilith and I piled into my car and made the trip over to Miss Piggy's. I had already warned her about the filthy state of the place, and you better believe that I had told her all about the WOLFBEARD nonsense. But rather than be apprehensive, Lilith maintained an incredibly amused air about the whole thing. Lilith is a creature that's mastered all 12 circles of sass, and is an entity I suspect to be composed of nothing but sheer concentrated spite. So I got the impression that she was actually disappointed that the beard would not be available for viewing in his natural habitat. She's kind of like Adelaide in that way, isn't she? However, to her delight, things that evening took a turn from what I was expecting. You see, when I pulled into the parking lot of the oh-so-familiar battle zone of the apartment complex, I spotted not one, but 2 cars in front of Miss Piggy's unit. There was Miss Piggy's car, and next to it, plain as day, was WOLFBEARD's car. I mean, he's a werewolf. He doesn't need a car to go camping. He just goes and runs around in the woods. He loves it for 5 minutes at a time. A wave of rage burbled up inside of me, and I froze in my tracks, no longer wanting to participate in the visit. Lilith, however, looked positively ecstatic and grabbed my arm, yanking me towards the unit. When I finally got to the door, I knocked a little harder than usual, my irritation apparent. However, Miss Piggy didn't seem to pick up on this in the slightest, and when she opened the door to greet us, there, oozing proudly on the couch, was none other than WOLFBEARD. Lilith nearly looked like Christmas had come early, hoping upon hope that she would get to see him bark or climb out of another window. I, however, was not in a good mood about the matter. A little curtly, I asked Miss Piggy, "I thought WOLFBEARD was joining his dad on a camping trip this weekend, Piggy."
Oh, well, he was, but when I told him you were coming over today, he decided to stay home instead.
The way she said this, as if it was nothing even slightly unusual, practically ran my blood cold. Was I living in the Twilight Zone? Why the hell would Miss Piggy tell WOLFBEARD I was coming over when I expressly told her that he made me uncomfortable and I didn't want to see him? What's more, why was she okay with him seemingly being so enamored with me that he'd canceled out on a trip with his dad that he had previously been super excited about? The whole thing just didn't sit right with me. As per usual, the moment I entered the room, WOLFBEARD's eyes laser-focused directly onto my chest. However, moments later, his gaze shifted to the new figure behind me. Upon spotting Lilith, it was his turn to look like Christmas had come.
Hello, my darling Calamity,
he chirped, picking up that stupid effeminate mock accent again.
I must say, you look positively appetizing as usual.
The way he said appetizing damn near set the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. He shifted into what I imagine he thought to be a seductive pose on the sofa and narrowed his eyes at me.
But I must say, who is that absolute snack behind you?
Lilith shot me a look of pure euphoric amusement at what her eyes were witnessing before stepping forward and introducing herself. "Hi, I'm Lilith. I'm Calamity's friend from high school. It's nice to meet you." There was absolutely no subtlety when WOLFBEARD's eyes shifted down to Lilith's cleavage. If my tall and slender frame is busty, Lilith's shorter and curvier frame is positively voluptuous, to say the least. And oftentimes her choice of wardrobe only emphasizes this, and it was all just too much for that poor beard. Sensing
a new female in his territory,
the mighty WOLFBEARD began his usual courting rituals, prying himself off the sofa like a wad of chewing gum that had been baked in the sun. He waddled to the side to usher
my ladies
into the now vacant seats. Gallant as he likely saw the act, the clearly defined sweaty ass print left seared onto the fabric of the sofa left us a little more than hesitant to take a seat. So instead we opted to sit in a circle on the living room carpet. To precisely no one's surprise, WOLFBEARD hurriedly worked to shove himself between Lilith and I. He sat crisscrossed while leaning back, his arms coming behind and dangerously close to touching Lilith and I. The next hour proceeded to be painfully slow and filled with an obscene amount of increasingly vulgar
joke comments
by WOLFBEARD. It seemed that as much fun as Lilith had initially thought this scenario would be, this beard was far more powerful than she had first anticipated. He was a creature of darker magics, older magics, and these unholy forces broke through even her seemingly impenetrable, war-hardened emotional battle armor, leaving her shifting uncomfortably and looking at me for escape. You asked for this. Handle this. Adelaide would handle this. At this, I took my opportunity to flee, and I told Miss Piggy that Lilith and I had something come up and we had to go. She seemed disappointed by the sudden departure, but accepted and bid us goodbye. However, it was WOLFBEARD that really seemed the most upset by this. His shoulders dropped and he looked down at the floor, his dirty golf cap casting a heavy shadow on his round face.
You really have to go so soon?
He asked in a quavering voice. Yeah, sorry about that, I responded, with zero interest in feeding into his act. At this, with great effort, he worked his way back up into a standing position before beginning to waddle in our direction.
That's really a shame,
he almost whispered.
I gave up spending time in the great wilderness to be able to hang out with you. And you should know what a big deal that is to me. My kind need to run wild and free in the forest. It's in our blood. It helps us keep control of the beast.
Lilith shot me a look, but he kept approaching us.
Well, at the very least, you can give me a hug before you go.
Before I could protest, his moist, flabby arms were crushing around me, pinning my arms to the side, and I was enveloped in a cloud of body odor that I previously never would have thought possible, and I had to fight the powerful urge to just retch. He squeezed way too hard, as if trying to smash me as close to him as possible, before finally releasing me from his bear trap of a grip, and then approaching Lilith with the same expectancy, despite her having literally just met him. She, however, wasn't quick enough to evade, and found herself smashed in the same stinking embrace that I had been in just moments before. You asked for this. As soon as she was released, the two of us fled to my car. However, over my shoulder, I called for Miss Piggy to join us for just a moment. Quickly, she hurried out and around the corner to meet us by my car. Once there, I sort of opened the floodgates on her. I told her that I was really irritated that WOLFBEARD was there after she all but promised that he wouldn't be, and that I was sick and tired of all the gross comments that he constantly made and how he tried to touch me all the time. Also, I had mentioned how he had been making Lilith uncomfortable as well. I firmly stated that I didn't want to have to be around WOLFBEARD again if he couldn't control himself. The scene must have looked pretty intense to any onlookers. We are in the Pacific Northwest, so even though it was the beginning of summertime, it was a gray and cloudy day, and it had begun to pour down heavy rain. However, the drama turned up even more a moment later, when we heard what sounded like a cross between a wounded cry and an attempt to howl like a wolf. I looked out across my window to the corner of the building. WOLFBEARD had crept out behind Miss Piggy, and at some point had been listening in on our discussion. Apparently, my declaration of not wanting him near me unless he could refrain from attempting to grope me was just far too painful a blow. As he dramatically ran off toward the wooded trail behind the apartment complex. Seeing this, Miss Piggy legitimately stifled a sob and cried after him for him to come back, but it was no use. The alpha beard had fled into the forest beyond, likely already transforming into a powerful beast to brood in the shadows. Seeing Miss Piggy in near hysterics, Lilith and I felt like we had no choice but to take her back inside and try and calm her down. She was rambling and raving about him and his condition.
We can't leave him alone out there like that. When he transforms while too upset, he can be reckless and could get himself caught. It's not safe,
she sobbed. After about 15 minutes of consoling a distraught Piggy, her phone rang. To seemingly no one but Miss Piggy's surprise, it was WOLFBEARD. She dramatically cooed into the phone at him, asking where he was and if he was okay. Having trouble hearing him, she switched the phone to speaker mode. What next met our ears was the most pathetic croaking sound I've ever heard in my life.
Piggy, I need help. My transformation was too quick and emotional, and I lost control. I ran wild and aimless in my pain, and somehow I've gotten myself stuck. I ran into a clay flat, and the rain has made it like a tar pit. I'm stuck, and my transformation weakened me too much to get out. Please, help me. I'm growing weaker yet.
He dramatically finished before hanging up the call. God, it's so good. At this, Miss Piggy went nuts again, screaming that we needed to call an ambulance or the police to go rescue him. It took 10 more minutes to calm her down once more, and she only did this after I called her brother and asked him to check the woods behind the nearby school for WOLFBEARD, as the trail from the apartment complex connected there. He agreed, and eventually Miss Piggy calmed down enough that Lilith and I felt that it was okay to finally leave. I don't know what happened to WOLFBEARD, but I knew it wasn't anything as dramatic as what he had made it seem, and I didn't want to play into his ploy for attention by being seen as waiting for him upon his return. Though I was not there for his retrieval, Miss Piggy's brother, who despite his wackadoodle sister is actually a pretty normal and nice dude, later called me to retell the harrowing journey. And oh, what a journey it was. You see, it was raining something awful that day, and it did make the trails terribly mucky, but there was no dangerous tar pit-like clay flat to trap emotionally distressed werewolves. No, when Miss Piggy's brother went to check the trail behind the school, he found WOLFBEARD face down in a literal mud puddle, his phone in his hand dramatically held out as if he gave out to the elements while calling for help. Apparently he was none too happy to see Miss Piggy's brother there instead of us, and all but made him single-handedly yank his oversized girth out of the puddle all by himself. To this day, I can't get that mental image of a grown-ass man plotting out a plan to make those
heartless women feel so bad they'll have to apologize and spend all their extra time with him.
Stalking through the rain and windswept back trail of a forest, searching for the perfect mud puddle, and then carefully nestling himself face down in it. Careful to keep his phone clean. The sight must have been spectacular. But I digress. This was just the first of WOLFBEARD's spectacular tantrums, and this was before he had even confessed his feelings about
my lady.
You see, he didn't give up easy. Neckbeards rarely do. And if beaching himself in a shallow slop puddle wasn't enough to force me to love him, then he'd just have to try a different approach. But that is a story for another day. I'll catch y'all next time for part 3. A grown-ass man playing pretend and laying down in a mud puddle in order to suck everybody into his fantasy. I can't with this, dude. This is grown-ass people acting like they're in Twilight or something like that. It's so wild. Oh my god. But I can't get enough. I just love it. The cringe bomb is super strong, but I gotta have some more. I couldn't help but feel like Lilith just kind of totally copped out on everything. She was built up by the OP. I'm like, oh, she's gonna be a total badass. And then she showed up and did nothing. All I'm saying is, if you really want to know how to get a neckbeard, go watch that Adelaide story. I mean, this story's decent. It's written well, but nothing stacks up to Ramtide, I gotta say. I fear for what has to come next, because, like, what goes beyond throwing yourself into a mud puddle in order to win a woman's affection? That's already, like, dangerously crazed. If we didn't already know that he was crazed from, you know, acting like a werewolf and climbing out the window and shit. Ah, it's too funny. I gotta get into part 3. WOLFBEARD 3, the Bionic Heartbreaker. Oh snap, look out. Hello once again, and thank you for your continued support. Today's tale continues the epic saga of our favorite lupine neckbeard and his quest to court
my lady.
When last we left off, WOLFBEARD had attempted to beach himself in a mud puddle on the forest trail behind the apartment complex after overhearing me say how much I disliked the gross comments that he made about me and how I didn't want to be around him anymore. a lesser beard may have given up and just decided that
I was a dumb whore and just wanted to find a Chad to hop on like all the others.
But Wolfbeard was a persistent one and had no intentions of giving up the hunt without his prize. Some time passed, and I did not speak to or see Miss Piggy for a while. She had kind of broken my trust in her with the last Wolfbeard incident, and I needed some time to cool off. It also didn't help that my friend Lilith had definitely not hit it off with Piggy. Right from the get-go, she told me that she got bad vibes from this girl, something that I should have listened to her about, but I would just have to find out about that the hard way a bit later. At the time, I thought it was just a little bit of rivalry. Miss Piggy definitely wasn't super warm towards Lilith. She seemed to feel as though the fact that we were friends longer, since kindergarten, automatically made her my sole and dearest best friend, and that my attempts to rekindle our old friendship was proof of this. However, Lilith and I are very close, and it's plain for anyone to see. I can't tell you the amount of times people have mistaken us for literal sisters. Since this clearly challenged Miss Piggy's perceived status, she was on her guard from the start. What's most fascinating to me, however, was that although Miss Piggy turned a willfully blind eye towards Wolfbeard's seeming apparent infatuation with me, the sight of those same behaviors directed towards Lilith just burned her up. Over the course of that evening that we had been over, every time Wolfbeard would make a gross comment directed at Lilith, instead of directing her anger at Wolfbeard, Piggy would shoot daggers into Lilith from across the room. Generally, Lilith is a really nice person. She's hilarious and mischievous, and will battle to the literal death for your honor if she cares about you. But get on this girl's bad side, and you will think Satan himself has personally targeted you. And Lilith really did not like Miss Piggy. It was only out of her respect for me that she promised to restrain herself and continue to make an effort to be cordial. But let's just say the diplomacy was rather shaky. So it was after this dry spell of a little over a week with no communication since the puddle incident that I suddenly got a phone call. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local area code, and I was expecting some other calls that day, so I just answered. But when the familiar husky voice on the other end of the line met my ears, I nearly hung up on the spot. Of course, it was Wolfbeard. Restraining my shock and anger at him for calling me despite having never been given my number, I allowed him to speak for a moment.
Hi, Calamity. Can we talk for a moment?
He breathed into the receiver. Wolfbeard, how did you get my number? I questioned as calmly as I could manage.
Oh, Miss Piggy gave it to me. I needed to talk to you so I could apologize.
I was suspicious, but surprised nonetheless, so I allowed him to continue.
I've reflected on my behavior a lot lately, and I realized that I treated you very badly. And I like you a lot, and I don't want to have destroyed our friendship, so will you please accept my apology and allow me to start over? I really want things to be good between Miss Piggy's friends and me.
He sounded genuinely sincere, and I was truly caught off guard. Of all of my experiences with Neckbeard kind, I've never known owning up to their bad behavior and apologizing to be within their realm of understanding. I mean, it is OP, but only for the sake of manipulation. It's science! And I still really did want to make things good between us if Miss Piggy was truly set on marrying him. And if he was actually going to make a change and make an effort, I decided what the hell, I'll give him a chance. And over the weeks that followed, he actually did make a change in his behavior. He finally stopped making gross comments, and had stopped trying to touch me as frequently. Mind you, he still had boundary issues and loomed far too close, and still had a crippling fear of deodorant, but things were much better, at least for a little while. See, once I made the mistake of expressing an above-average interest in something in Wolfbeard's presence, said thing became
his whole life.
Said thing was a small band or group of performers called Steam-Powered Giraffe. They have like a fun, old-timey vaudeville sound to their music and stick to this whole steampunk robotic theme. All the band members and performers dress up in these like intricate steampunk robot or mad scientist type costumes and play characters. In between their songs, they have little skits in character and interact with the audience. It's super fun because they highly encourage audience participation, as in they encourage them to create their own in-universe characters and show up to the events in costume and play along with the band. It's a really fun and unique experience, and as I was already an avid cosplayer, it really appealed to me. Oh, steampunk. Don't even get me started. But hey, if you're into it, you do you. The topic came up during a group meetup. I had reluctantly agreed to go despite knowing that Wolfbeard would be there, because several other friends that I didn't get to see too often were also going to be there. Both are super dear friends to me still to this day. The first was Doe, you guessed it, another D&D moniker. She'd met Miss Piggy shortly after I'd moved away. She was friends with her through middle school, but began to distance herself a bit when Piggy met Wolfbeard in high school. However, it seemed that she too had an interest in rekindling an old friendship, thus her appearance at the lunch meetup. Doe would also have the misfortune of later becoming roommates with Miss Piggy. Oh god. But that's a whole different story, and perhaps I can convince her to share her own stories with you about that. The other girl joining us was a friend that I'll call Valor. Valor had no previous connections to Miss Piggy or Wolfbeard. She's someone that I had met and befriended online before learning that she was also a college student in the same state as me. Our schedules made it really hard to hang out often, so when I learned we were both free, I invited her to the group outing. I thought it would be safe enough, given Wolfbeard's recent attempts at adjusting his behavior and the sheer number of people in our group. Let's just say that although Wolfbeard stayed true to his word about cutting back on the weird sexual comments, he found entirely new ways to make a whole room full of women uncomfortable. With the exception of Miss Piggy, of course, who was completely clueless. After the initial greetings, where Wolfbeard tried to force a stinking hug on each of the female guests in the group, he came upon Valor for the first time. Her saving grace was that she was already in a long-term relationship with her then-girlfriend, now fiancé. I think he realized that since this new "milady" was not only taken, but also taken by another "milady," meant that she would be much more work to
convince of his charms.
So he spared her of his more aggressive courting in favor of the other single damsels in need of saving in the group. As I'm sure one can imagine by now, Wolfbeard was not an easy specimen to attempt having a conversation around. He had a thing with needing to not only participate in every conversational topic that arose, but to domineer it, even if he had to make up some ridiculous story to do so. One of the ladies shares a story about the time they met Elijah Wood at the Space Needle restaurant, and Elijah was nice enough to let her get a quick picture on her way out. Well,
better one-up it!
Ah yes, who could forget the time that Wolfbeard ran into Morgan Freeman at Barnes & Noble? You know, that time that really actually truly happened, and they spoke for over an hour, and Wolfbeard taught Mr. Freeman a whole new stance on philosophy, and in thanks, Morgan Freeman swore that he would never forget Wolfbeard. Oh god, that's good. I expressed an interest in singing and songwriting as a hobby.
Oh, you better believe Wolfbeard was offered a contract with Universal Records for his heavenly voice.
But it wasn't his dream, so he turned him down. Sorry guys, I got a much shittier job working for my dad. I could go on for hours, but this story is already getting long and I haven't even started with the main events. Wolfbeard was the truest example of a pathological liar that I had ever, and to this day have ever, met. I suppose trying to convince me that he was a literal werewolf should have been a warning sign to this. But I digress. He could weave these insanely intricate stories completely impromptu, and they weren't just short little blurbs. He'd craft a story that was 5+ minutes long, just as naturally as one breathes. I struggled just lying well enough to not spoil surprises for my friends, so I can't even imagine the process that he had going on in his brain, to be honest. You probably don't want to. His brain seems like a scary place. Well, after dealing with Wolfbeard butting into our conversation for the last 30 minutes, Doe, Valor, and I shifted our body language a tad to form a circle, effectively closing Wolfbeard off before beginning a new topic that we assumed he wouldn't know anything about. that small band that I mentioned before. The three of us were really having fun with it, and I decided to make some steampunk robot costumes of our own to wear to an upcoming concert. We then talked about the band a little more and agreed on a mutual favorite robot, the one called the Spine. Basically a 6-foot-plus silver and black robot with big battle spines jutting out of his back in a swanky Roaring Twenties inspired getup. He has this super smooth, deep voice that tends to catch the attention of a lot of the lady fans. Plus, he plays the exacerbated straight man to the group of otherwise goofy and hyperactive characters, and that's a trope that I live for. Well, my favorite robot is Voltron. Sensing the "miladies" taking interest in another male, even an entirely fictional android one that was just a stage act, was unacceptable, and he had to move with haste before he lost us entirely to the wicked robot overlords. You see, I was foolish in assuming that he wouldn't know who the band was. I had been posting about them occasionally on my various social media accounts because I was excited about the upcoming concert. And should I really have expected WOLFBEARD to not be stalking every account I owned that wasn't strictly private? Oh no, he knew exactly who they were, and had apparently dug through every piece of media he could get his hands on regarding them in an attempt to
woo me with his knowledge of my interests.
So you better believe he had to jut into the conversation right at that very moment, breaking out his handy-dandy, fake effeminate voice once more.
Oh, that spine is just so sexy,
he barked loudly across the table, snapping his fingers in a zigzag motion, attracting looks from the surrounding tables. He then straightened his back up and brought a hand to his chest, gripping an invisible tie in an attempt to mimic the spine's signature pose, turning his head slightly to the right, striking an eerie grin, and pulling his golf hat lower to try and cast a shadow over his eyes, similarly to how the spine's fedora is. Yeah, the spine legit did wear a fedora, but believe it or not, when you get a well-fitted one with a wide enough brim that doesn't make you look like a fathead with a baby hat, and you pair it with a masterfully tailored suit and vest rather than repulse, it actually does magical things. But that pitiful golf hat and ill-fitted trench coat decidedly did not. Not to mention his charming grin that made the whole picture look quite deranged. Yeah, fedoras can look fucking awesome. That's why neckbeards tried to steal them, you see? They thought they'd look as cool if they wear the fedora. Problem is they don't understand the whole concept of, like, matching or not being a creep while wearing one. If that wasn't bad enough, he then switched from the effeminate voice to as deep as he could force himself, trying his damnedest to mimic the robot's smooth voice and mannerisms. I don't really like to use the word cringy to describe things, but there's really no other way to describe the immense discomfort that this absurd behavior gave us. What's worse is that he continued to talk in this voice for the rest of the meal, as well as every other time that I saw him for the next few weeks. He also didn't stop mimicking body posture and mannerisms as well. I guess being a werewolf wasn't cool enough for him anymore, and now he wanted to identify as an android. Oh god. The moment he insinuated how
he'd like to go to the concert and chaperone the lovely miladies,
we quickly changed the topic, and shortly after, finished the lunch and fled. A few days later, I wound up back at Miss Piggy's apartment to hang out with her and Doe. Doe and I got to chatting about the progress of our costumes. I'm a bit of a seamstress, and I love making crazy costumes. For my robot, I did this like Victorian bustle skirt. You know, the ones that make women look like they had massive rears because of all the ruffles, and the literal pillow that you tie above your butt. It was knee length in the front and floor length in the back. It was a huge effort and cost way more than I wanted to spend in material, but it was coming along nicely and would be ready in time for the show. I was exhausted from working on it and just barely had enough time to balance it between classes. Well, little did Doe and I know, WOLFBEARD had been lurking in the back bedroom. We had been under the impression that he was napping, but I guess he had just been lying there in the dark, listening to us chatting. Because that's not creepy. No sooner did I finish talking about my costume and asking Doe about how hers was going, WOLFBEARD appeared in the living room and answered in her place, as if the question had been for him.
I'd love to do something Phantom of the Opera style. My robot is dark and brooding, and along with having the most beautiful singing voice, he also plays the organ skillfully.
The skin flute? Is that the organ?
He was supposed to be in the band originally, but his broken heart made him malfunction too frequently, so he was stored away up in the attic.
He finished dramatically, still using that stupid attempt at a deep voice, mind you. Oh, so good. Miss Piggy clasped her heart and sighed at him sadly, but Doe and I just gave each other a look of, can you believe this shit? Feeling particularly adventurous that day, I ventured to interact. That's a lovely backstory for your character, WOLFBEARD, but theatrical costuming for something like that would probably take a while. Are you sure you'll have enough time to sew it? I asked, raising an eyebrow at the idea of him squeezing in front of a sewing machine and flinging it off the table in a fit of werewolf rage if it got snagged.
Oh, well, I was hoping that you'd make it for me since you're so good at sewing,
he responded, without missing a beat.
You can take my measurements right now if you like, and the fabric store should be open until 9 tonight, so you'll have time to get the materials. I'd like it to be made of something rich, like satin or velvet, but you can buy whatever you prefer.
I sat silent and blinking for a moment. So this freaking boob wanted me to not only spend hours slaving away making a costume for him when I wasn't even done with my own, but on top of it all, he wanted me to pay for it out of my own pocket. What a boob indeed. Doe's eyes were the size of dinner plates, and her mouth hung ajar in shock. I had to take a stabilizing breath to remain calm before responding. I'm sorry, WOLFBEARD, but I can't make your costume for you. I'm not even done with my own yet, and I certainly wouldn't have time for another, let alone something that complicated. Plus, I can't really afford that. His body sagged, and his face drooped in sadness. He was legitimately upset that I had turned down his demands. Then, as sadly as he could muster, as if trying to guilt me into changing my mind, he continued,
That's all right, Calamity. I understand. I'll make it myself then. I am a world-class tailor in my own right, after all.
At this point, I just wanted to scream, Then why did you even ask me to make it for you in the first place? But I knew he was lying again, so I just held it in. More time passed, and suddenly it was just days before the concert. Doe, unfortunately, wasn't going to be able to make it due to work and school, and robots were never really Lilith's thing, so she opted to pass, but Valor and I were hyped and ready to go. Turn up, turn up. The band was doing 2 shows, one Friday and one Saturday. Valor and I opted for the Saturday showing because that was the only day that the band was also doing meet and greets and photos, and we had bought that package. I was happily finishing the last little details of my costume when I got a text on my phone. Looking down, I realized, it was from WOLFBEARD, who still had my number, sadly, thanks to Miss Piggy. He informed me that
he had just managed to get time off from work and buy his tickets for the show, and he couldn't wait to see me and Valor there.
My heart turned to lead. He then sent another message after that.
See you Friday!
Suddenly, my heart somersaulted back upwards. I'd never made any social media posts about which day I was going, and he had assumed the wrong day. With a smile plastered on my face, I pulled out all of my fake sympathy as I responded. Oh, well, have fun at the show, but I'm gonna be there on Saturday. I have tickets for the meet and greet, so Valor and I won't be going on Friday. There was a brief moment of silence before he responded again.
The meet and greet is on Friday. I saw it, they changed it on Facebook. Better go buy a Friday ticket before they run out.
I wanted to beat my freaking head on a wall. This damn lying fool was at it again. I looked down at the tickets in my hand that clearly stated Saturday, and for good measure, I did check the band's Facebook page. No posts announcing a day change. Feeling a little aggravated at WOLFBEARD's attempt to deceive me, I shot back, "My meet and greet tickets say Saturday, and there is no such post."
"The post was just there! They must have taken it down!"
WOLFBEARD quickly fired back, seemingly not prepared for me to see through his hastily thought-up lie. I thought the shame of being cornered in a lie would have been enough to deter him for a while, but once again, I underestimated the determination of our bionic wolfman. Saturday rolled around, and Valor and I had a blast. We got into our costumes and met up with some of the folks for dinner before the show. The place was a sort of geek-themed tavern, and it was full of other concert attendees in costumes, so we really didn't stand out. All in all, it was a fantastic evening. Things were amazing. Until we arrived at the venue. The meet and greet was happening before the show, and we got to stand in a special line to get in early and take our photos and get our seats. Valor and I were fairly far up the line, chatting with some nice people that we had met, when I suddenly felt a large, moist hand grip my shoulder from behind. I nearly screamed before turning around to see none other than WOLFBEARD. And that's the point where you should have actually screamed. He was standing there in his wolf tee, fingerless gloves, and an infamous golf hat, with a huge grin pasted on his face. I was shocked and horrified to see him there. The weight in my stomach dropped even further when he proceeded to pick up the dumb mimicking gestures and voice again, in the company of our new friends, no less.
"It's great to see you here, Calamity. I decided to buy a ticket for Saturday as well because I really wanted a photo with the band."
Yeah, sure. It's totally got nothing to do with making sure that you got to come on the same day as me, despite already having bought a ticket for a different night. The fact that he was so badly mimicking a band member in front of countless fans of said band, who could clearly tell what he was doing, just made it exponentially worse. Trying to keep him from going on too much of a roll, I tried to change the subject. "So, where's your costume, WOLFBEARD? I thought you were a world-class tailor." His gaze dropped to the street below, his mind clearly buzzing to make up some ridiculous grand story, and he certainly didn't disappoint. I kid you guys not, Valor can attest to this. He looked me dead in the eye and said,
"I had nearly completed my masterpiece when the most horrible thing happened. I was using my mother's old sewing machine, and on the last seam, the machine broke and caught on fire."
That's not how sewing machines work.
"It destroyed my entire costume, and I simply didn't have time to craft up another one."
Like, dude, what the hell? How was it easier to literally craft up some fairy tale about your sewing machine spontaneously combusting than it is to just tell the truth that you don't actually know how to sew? I would have had way more respect for that and might have even encouraged you. But instead, we were fed this wild woven fantasy and expected to believe it? To this day now, whenever my friends and I procrastinate on something and the other asks us about it, we answer by saying,
"It was almost done, but it caught on fire, so I gotta start over."
So at this point, I noticed WOLFBEARD trying to osmosis his way into the circle my friends have formed in line. He comments,
"How excited he is to take a picture of the band with Valor and I."
All the while, everyone in the group is eyeing me uncomfortably. So I speak up before he can cement his position. "Sorry, WOLFBEARD, Valor and I just want a photo of the two of us since we're in costume. Also, you probably shouldn't cut in line. People have been here for almost an hour waiting, and it really wouldn't be fair." He looked wounded by my words, and doubly so when he saw Valor and our new friends nodding in agreement. Perhaps the biggest blow, however, was that two of our new friends were tall, rather cute twin guys dressed as matching robots. Once again, those damn robot overlords were robbing him of what was rightfully his. Well, I for one welcome our new robot overlords. Dejectedly, he dropped his head and slank to the back of the line. For the next 30 minutes, while we waited for them to let us in, I could feel an intense set of eyes sinking into me from the back of the line. The few times I dared to steal a glance from the side of my eyes, I spotted WOLFBEARD almost unblinkingly and intensely staring at me. Sensing my apparent distress, the twins kindly offered to let Valor and I go in front of them in line, and they stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking us from view. From there, we got a brief reprieve. We had our meet and greet in peace, and hit it off with the band so well that they took 3 different pictures with us, instead of just the one that the ticket was supposed to cover. They even complimented the handiwork of my costume, which just tickled me pink. They were all really sweet and genuine people, and it just made me like the group all that much more. It wasn't until Valor and I were on our way to find our seats that we spotted WOLFBEARD making his way up to the stage for his meet and greet. He locked eyes with us, and then did this stupid strut thing up to the stage that I imagine he thought
made him look like a rock star.
Valor and I could have fled, but a morbid curiosity left us glued in place, watching. And boy did he give us his show. To this day, I still feel so bad for David, the man who plays the spine. If by happen chance you ever read this, please know that I am in no way affiliated with WOLFBEARD, and I apologize sincerely for his behavior towards you. You see, the first thing WOLFBEARD does upon reaching the band on stage is head straight for Spine. He ignores the hand that the Spine had stretched out for a friendly shake, and instead envelops him in the crushing hug that I knew and dreaded so well. After that, WOLFBEARD's assault still was not finished. He proceeded to rub his greasy hands all over this poor man's abdominal region, and in the creepiest voice, made an over-sexually sounding, "Oh!" moan. He then loudly announced,
"You must have titanium under there!"
and cackled wildly at his own perceived cleverness. Even through the intense theatrical robot makeup Spine was wearing, you could read true fear on his face. It was in his eyes, despite the shaky smile that he managed to keep on his lips. The whole ordeal physically hurt to watch. When it came time to take his photo, he then looped a sweaty arm over the Spine's shoulder, forcing him to smell the unimaginable horrors of his pits. And pulled him in close. He did another one of those, "Oh!" moans. And then stretched out the arm that wasn't around Spine's shoulder and pointed at the camera with a handgun gesture. Valor and I had hit our cringe limit and had to flee at this point before WOLFBEARD had a chance to catch up with us on our way to our seats. Thank God it was assigned seating. The rest of the night was good, and the concert was fantastic, but it still pings an uncomfortable secondhand embarrassment nerve in my stomach when I think back to the meet and greet. The whole thing left me mortified, and I couldn't even bring myself to go back over to Miss Piggy's for quite a while after that. The thought of having come face to face with WOLFBEARD again after all that was just too much. However, while I was away, our ambitious Robo-Wolf was hard at work scheming. Even after everything up to that point, he had still not processed the fact that I was not interested, and he had no plans of giving up on me. And since sexually aggressive comments and mimicking a character I was fond of didn't do the trick, he had one more trick up his sleeve. Now would be the time to pull out all the stops and try his hand at blatant puppet mastering of mutual friends and emotional manipulation. But that is a story that I'll have to get into next time. And here's a picture of OP on the left and the Spine on the right, so you can see who WOLFBEARD was trying to impersonate quite unsuccessfully. One thing that I will say about neckbeards is, well, they are doggedly determined, which can be a good or a bad thing based on your perspective, but with that determination comes just a mastery of Google Foo. You tell him the name of the band one time, and he's like hard at work on the computer, creating flowcharts and shit, pinning pictures to a corkboard and just going crazy with red twine trying to connect all the dots. He's a madman. I would not put anything past WOLFBEARD. He is just, what a specimen. I think OP did call him a specimen at one point. And that is something that I love to refer to neckbeards as, because of course we are doing science over here, but it is rarely as accurate as we are seeing unfold in this story, man. I can't imagine how he manages to kick it up again, but I guess we shall see as we jump into the next part. WOLFBEARD 4,
Siren of the Lake.
Welcome back, friends. By now, we're really getting into the swing of things. As usual, when we last left off, WOLFBEARD has once again managed to further disgust me and push me farther away than ever thanks to his horrendous behavior. You know, trying to literally become a favorite character of mine to woo me, and then nearly sexually harassing said character at a meet and greet. The usual. Some time passed, and due to more discomfort than ever, I didn't go anywhere near Miss Piggy's place to avoid interacting with this relentless beard. It was a particularly beautiful summer, and I was out enjoying time with Valor, Doe, and Lilith. We bought some river lounging tubes, and loaded up into one of our cars and would drive out to the various lakes and rivers for the day. Sounds awesome. It was shaping up to be just the summer I needed to deal with what I knew would be a particularly hellish fall quarter, given that I was about to start my major capstone project. However, little did I know, darker plans were being orchestrated behind my back at the hands of our golf hat donning puppet master. You see, despite the bad foot he had gotten off onto with Lilith from our first meeting, he had managed to somehow worm his way back in, much like he had with me upon his initial apology. Once again, Miss Piggy had handed over the phone number, or at least that's what WOLFBEARD had told Lilith, which only made her dislike for Miss Piggy grow. He admitted later that
he had gone through her phone to read her message history with me and saw the number for Lilith there when I was initially setting up our meetup a few weeks back.
Lilith naturally started on the offensive, but after his countless apologies and a lengthy, handcrafted, tragic backstory, Lilith softened towards him. You see, Lilith really likes to help people fix themselves. She's been through hell growing up, and as a result is extremely empathetic with people also going through rough things, even if they're entirely fabricated for pity. She's even working to get her certification to be a counselor now. She just wants to make a difference for people who are in pain. And boy, did WOLFBEARD sense this trait and work it as hard as he possibly could. Feeling bad for him, Lilith began chatting with him regularly. Unbeknownst to me, this had been going on all the time that I had been avoiding Miss Piggy's. WOLFBEARD told Lilith of the abusive upbringing and neglectful parents, the same parents who dote on him like Augustus Gloop. Coddling and praising every action, showering him with gifts and affection every waking moment that I ever saw them. Yeah, I ended up over at WOLFBEARD's parents' house with Miss Piggy when I was dragged over there for his birthday one year. I'll have to tell you about that later. Anyways, this news of his tragic upbringing truly was news to anyone else who ever knew him, as before Lilith he would do nothing but brag about his
wealthy parents that he had wrapped around his fingers.
Anyways, so despite being brought up in an abusive home, WOLFBEARD also brought out the big guns. This is the single declaration and accusation that sent shockwaves rippling through our friend group over the next year. WOLFBEARD had confessed to Lilith that he had been in love with me
from the first moment he laid eyes on me,
and that
he didn't want to marry Miss Piggy.
He claimed that he was trapped in an unhealthy relationship with her and that she would not let him leave. Now, to be fair and truthful, he was not entirely dishonest in this regard. As I would later learn, WOLFBEARD and Miss Piggy were indeed in a very unhealthy relationship. I could tell that from the first story. And she did have her claws sunken into him. To be blatantly honest, I was disgusted and mortified by some of the things I learned that Miss Piggy had been doing, but that aside, WOLFBEARD was not the sole victim. They were mutually abusive and equally selfish with one another. I suppose I can fully enlighten you on that madness when I give Miss Piggy her own feature story, but for the sake of this current one, that's more than enough to go on. Now, this was the tipping point for Lilith. She went from disliking and wanting to avoid Miss Piggy to straight up hating her very existence. WOLFBEARD's fusion of made-up abuse and strands of truth regarding his relationship with Miss Piggy mirrored just the right amount of Lilith's own past traumas that she immediately became protective of WOLFBEARD, seeing him like a wounded and broken little brother that she needed to help save. I suspect that this scenario was only possible in the first place since WOLFBEARD had backed off quite a bit, having learned that Lilith already had a boyfriend. Otherwise, it's quite likely he would have shifted his sights from me to her. But as I had the grave misfortune to be one of the only single ladies in our friend group, He seemingly doubled down his focus. Suddenly, when I had plans to go do something with Lilith, WOLFBEARD would magically be there too. He'd learn that Lilith and I had plans and then lay on the
"My depression's acting up and I'm too scared to be alone"
real thick. And then Lilith would offer the invitation to join. I'm not gonna lie, this period of time started to cause some issues in my friendship with Lilith. By the time the WOLFBEARD saga had concluded, our friendship would have made it through one of the biggest trials of our lives. For this, I have vowed to never forgive him, as immature as that might be. The promise WOLFBEARD had made to cut back on the creepiness had all but gone out the window after he felt that he had successfully befriended Lilith. Mind you, he was pretty good at restraining himself in her presence, but the second she turned her back or left the area to fetch something, he was worse than ever, making gross suggestive comments about me and my body, trying to touch my shoulders, arms, and even grabbing locks of my hair. Ugh, maybe he's gonna have a warlock do a mate bond. That's a throwback to the WEREWOLF saga for the uninitiated. I told Lilith about it, and she would ask WOLFBEARD in turn, but he'd put on this
"Boo-hoo, I'm so pathetic. I don't know how to socialize because of my abusive parents"
act, and nothing would ever come of it. As a result, I started getting quite cold and bitchy with him. He had crossed the line, and I was done being nice. He must have finally sensed my disgust with him, as one evening when the three of us had met up for lunch, he pulled a power move with me. He thought it would be a good idea to first
make his heartfelt confession of love to me,
and then attempt to throw my still friend at the time, Miss Piggy, under the bus. He informed me of his
toxic situation
and how he
was planning on officially leaving her so he could properly ask me out.
It was too much for me. I probably shortened my lifespan tapping into unholy forces for the strength to restrain myself. Rather than saying everything I had desperately been wanting to for months at this point, I kept it concise in the presence of our now mutual friend. I thank you for telling me this, WOLFBEARD, but I just don't feel the same about you, and I never will. I met you as my oldest friend's fiance, and I can never undo that first impression. Plus, the way you've been flirting with me relentlessly, all while still engaged with her, has been just a major turnoff. I felt my voice begin to rise, and nearly unleash the gates of hell on him, but Lilith's pleading eyes caught my attention, so I swallowed the rage and turned on my heel, preferring to excuse myself rather than cause any more of a scene. When I reached my car, I got a text from Lilith. She thanked me for not going full Hulk smash on him, and that he was in a fragile state, and said that she would stay behind with him and try to convince him to let his feelings for me go since I had turned him down, and the continued tension would make things uncomfortable for everyone. Deciding to take advantage of my now freed up day, I called Miss Piggy. After everything WOLFBEARD had just said about her, I wanted to hear her side of the story. She fortunately had a short day at work, so was on her way back to her apartment and said I could meet her there. The drive was short and I was there in minutes. Despite the insensitivity of it, I wasted no time in telling her everything that WOLFBEARD had confessed, his love for me included. Sadness washed over her face, and with a resigned sigh, she finally began to explain her end of things to me. She had known about his feelings for me for a while. She'd hoped that since I had been repulsed by him, he would eventually give up on it and shift his focus back to her. But he hadn't, and he had only become more and more obsessed with me. Recently, they'd gotten into a fight because WOLFBEARD had told Miss Piggy that
he wanted to break up so he could pursue me.
But Miss Piggy refused to let him go. In desperation, she held things over his head. Since she was the primary signer of the lease, if he left her, she would keep the apartment, as filthy a dump as it was. This shouldn't have meant anything to WOLFBEARD, as his obscenely rich parents had a massive house that they would have welcomed him back into with open arms. But WOLFBEARD was a proud sort, and it had been a battle to convince them to let him move out in the first place, despite him being a grown-ass adult already, and the idea of telling his parents that
he was coming back home because it hadn't worked out
was just too shameful for him, especially since he had put so much time into convincing Lilith that they were abusive monsters that he had finally freed himself from. So out of stubbornness and pride, he stayed. And out of comfort and convenience, he didn't go through with the breakup. That being said, however, things were not good between them. She had started picking up this game of playing that she was some kind of clairvoyant with future-telling dreams. Which apparently clashed with his werewolf game, so the tension grew, especially when she had prophetic dreams of them being married with children, and me having met a man from Europe whom with I eloped. As horrifying as it is to picture, despite this clearly toxic relationship and his growing dislike of Miss Piggy, WOLFBEARD still used her for
physical intimacy
during this time. That is horrifying to picture. Thanks, OP. The epiphany was mind-numbingly sickening, but suddenly, a recent change in Miss Piggy all made sense. Over the last month, she had begun attempting to change her wardrobe to resemble mine as much as she could. She started wearing darker colors, dyed her hair the same color, attempted to do her makeup the same, including black lipstick, which she used to despise, and even started wearing glasses. Is this not creepy to you, OP? You didn't make this connection until right now. At the time, I assumed that she was just shifting interests and wanted to adopt a look similar to mine out of growing closeness to me, but of course it could never be something so childishly innocent. No. Miss Piggy began attempting to appear as some sort of morbidly obese Twilight Zone version of myself. Because it was the only way she could get WOLFBEARD to even touch her anymore. God, that's sad. Excuse me a moment. I need a second to violently retch and stare into the existential void while recalling this. I hope you're entertained because I'm dying a little inside right now. It's more sad than anything. It's probably the saddest part of the story so far, even if Miss Piggy is a massive leg beard. So yes, even though Miss Piggy knew all of this, as well as my discomfort towards WOLFBEARD, she still would constantly invite me over to their apartment because she believed it was appeasing him and would make him stay. After all, if they broke up and she was his only connection to me, once she was gone, I would be out of his life as well. And if you hadn't guessed it by now, that magic sixth sense, which told WOLFBEARD wherever I was somewhere with Miss Piggy in town in order for him to miraculously show up and join us, had been Miss Piggy all along. Well, that's even more creepy than my cell phone GPS tracking theory from earlier. Now, initially, I was bloody outraged learning all of this, but when she broke down crying and continued, I softened. She wept like a baby, saying how he was her first true love. He had been her pillar through high school. He had been perfect. Their relationship was perfect. They were so in love and devoted to one another, but as soon as they graduated, something shifted. He lost interest in her. He began shamelessly checking out her friends and flirting with countless women online. He'd even started several online relationships straight under Miss Piggy's nose, basically telling her that
because it was just online, it wasn't real.
He never used real pictures of himself, of course. It was always sexy anime men or pictures of emo guys that he got from Google. Thank God reverse image search is a thing. Even though it broke her heart, she was scared of losing him for good. As frustrated as I was for having been used as a tool in their broken mess of a relationship, the sobbing mass in front of me could only muster up pity in me. I get that same feel, OP. I'm sure we'll find out more that will make me despise Miss Piggy during the Miss Piggy saga, but for now she does just seem kind of broken and pathetic. So instead of kicking her while she was down, I put my anger aside and gave her a hug. I told her that I understood the pain that she was in, but that the relationship was absolutely poisonous, and that she'd be far better off if she just ended it. To my surprise, she sniffed and weakly nodded her head. She even agreed to sit down and talk with him about it later that night. Well, a few more days passed, and I hadn't heard from either of them. It wasn't until she invited both Doe and I over to her place a week later that I learned the status of things. It seemed as though she had indeed followed my advice, at least on the surface level. Her and WOLFBEARD had officially called off the engagement. However, something was still rather fishy. WOLFBEARD wouldn't be moving out or putting any space between him and Miss Piggy, and more importantly, her friends. He planned to stay in the apartment strictly as Miss Piggy's platonic roommate. Ah yes, a tiny apartment with one shared bed for non-romantically involved exes. Makes perfect sense. I mean, they do have a couch, I guess. Anyways, this whole situation was super weird and awkward. The dynamic between the two was virtually unchanged when they were together, but whenever they were apart, it was a very different tune from both of them. Miss Piggy would agonize about how much she wanted him back, and that letting him go was a huge mistake. And Wolfbeard would gripe about
how much he had grown to detest Miss Piggy, and how he wished he didn't have to still live with her.
Yet, surprisingly, he refused to just move back home. All the while, they were still sleeping with each other. I know, guys, it was a big mess. Things were still as uncomfortable as ever when I was near Wolfbeard, if not more so since his confession. But shit really hit the fan one fateful summer day when Lilith and I planned to go swimming at a lake. I had been super excited about the trip for days. It was a bit of a drive, but the lake was absolutely gorgeous. It was surrounded by beautiful forested hiking trails, and you could even camp there. It had been because my hopes for the day had been so gloriously high that seeing Wolfbeard sitting in the back of Lilith's car when she came to pick me up made my heart turn to lead and drop so unbelievably hard, it might as well have been hit with a sledgehammer. I tried my best to whisper calmly to her, asking why the hell Wolfbeard was there on what was supposed to be a trip for just the two of us. She guiltily sighed and said that last night when she'd mentioned our trip, Wolfbeard had become extremely sad. He told her that the breakup had left him feeling extremely depressed and alone, and he went for the kill, of course, capitalizing off of her hatred for Miss Piggy. Desperate to both make Wolfbeard feel better and stick one to Miss Piggy, Lilith invited him to join us on our trip to the lake. Oh boy. Lilith did feel a bit bad about surprising me with his presence like this, though. She knew that I was looking forward to this trip and how I was just really generally uncomfortable with the idea of Wolfbeard pining for me. So she only let him join along under the condition that he swore he accepted my rejection of his feelings, and that he wouldn't spend the day trying to make me change my mind, and that, most importantly, he would not pout about it. Since he agreed to all of those terms, she had let him come, not knowing that he had no intention of keeping his word on the matter. Ah boy. The drive out to the lake surprisingly wasn't nearly as painful as I had initially suspected. Unlike every other time Wolfbeard was in proximity of a conversation, he didn't feel the need to butt in and domineer it with wild fake stories. No, today he was working a different angle. He knew that I knew that he liked me now, and he also knew that I had rejected him. So today's game to play was Mr.
Sad and broken-hearted,
despite the strict no pouting policy that Lilith had literally just set in place. He hardly said a word the whole ride, bless. Lilith and I chatted away happily in the front of the car, and I'd occasionally glance back and catch him dramatically leaned against the window, a hand up to the temple of his drooping head. Now and then he'd catch my eye and respond with a huge, ever so sad sigh, before closing his eyes and whipping his head away. Melodramatic as it was, I far preferred this to his usual behavior, so I paid him very little mind. Unlike me, however, Lilith seemed rather irked by his direct disobedience and began to grow irritated with him. When we got to the lake, it was amazing. The weather was perfect, the skies were clear, and there surprisingly were very few other people, perhaps due to the distance outside of civilization. Lilith and I happily bounded towards the forest trail that led to the lake, hands full of blankets and beach paraphernalia. Following behind us was Wolfbeard, sagging sadly and carrying nothing but his own pathetic mass. I didn't mind, though. I like to imagine him not even being there. Despite the basic ground rules that Lilith had laid out for him, the poor beard just couldn't help himself in breaking another. As we neared the lake and changing rooms, Wolfbeard let out a great sigh and finally spoke.
It's truly a shame,
he breathily whimpered.
Beautiful days like this, beautiful memories. If you were my girl, we'd make them all the time. I'd make you so happy, Calamity. I really would.
I didn't even have time to answer this time. Lilith's eyes twitched with anger and she cut in my place. Yeah, well, like it or not, you've got to accept that it's not happening. Calamity's already told you she doesn't feel that way about you, so you need to respect her wishes and drop it. At this, we left him standing alone outside as we entered the women's changing rooms. I swear, I could hear more projected loud sighs ringing through the air as I slipped into my bikini. That man was hell-bent on trying to guilt me into loving him. I almost felt bad for him, but this is Wolfbeard we're talking about, so he got no pity, let's be real. When we stepped back outside, Wolfbeard was still there, unchanged and as pouty as ever. His eyes immediately wandered hungrily over our bodies, and it literally took Lilith directing a question at him to snap him back to attention. "Why aren't you changed yet? We're going into the lake." He shrugged and looked down to the dirt trail below.
I didn't realize I needed to bring one. You never told me to.
Even Lilith and her ever-expansive mercy on this fine specimen was beginning to falter. "What do you mean? I told you we were going out to swim in a lake today."
You should have told me to pack one still. You can always drive us back to my apartment. I could call Miss Piggy and have her run it out to me,
he offered, as if seeing nothing wrong with this proposition. Lilith, however, looked like she was nearing the breaking point. "Wolfbeard, we drove nearly 2 hours to get here. We're not gonna drive all the way back so you can get the swimsuit that you should have been smart enough to know to bring in the first place." He sighed and dropped his shoulders even further.
It's fine. I can always wait on the beach while you two swim,
he sadly murmured, expecting us to take pity and not actually do that. But that is exactly what we did. As it should be. Lilith just shot him and, "All right then." And we grabbed our things and kept walking for the lake. We laid out the blankets on the beach, and while Lilith ran straight for the water, I hung back a moment to finish applying my sunscreen. It was a big mistake leaving Wolfbeard a brief moment alone with me, and I regret it to this day. Not wasting a moment to pounce, while applying sunscreen to the last portion of my arm, I felt sweaty, pudgy fingers come into contact with the bare skin of my back, dangerously close to my bikini strap. I leapt forward away from the offending hand and whipped around to face Wolfbeard.
I was just gonna help you with your sunscreen,
he said, mocking offense. "Lilith already helped me. You were there while she did it," I shot back.
I don't know why you're being so cold to me, Calamity. All I've ever done is love you, yet you won't even give me a chance, he responded stubbornly.
"Wolfbeard, I've told you this once before, and I will tell you again. I'm not interested in dating you. But before I could finish, he cut me off.
I know. You met me as Miss Piggy's fiance, and that makes it weird to you. But the thing is, just don't think about her. She doesn't matter. What matters right now is you and me. And I'm asking you, from the bottom of my heart, please, Calamity, will you make me the happiest man alive and be my girl?"
I'm not particularly proud of my behavior on this day. I let my anger rule me and became the living embodiment of bitchiness. A hateful Amazon entity, hungry for neckbeard tears, had possessed my spirit, and I couldn't stop myself. Delicious neckbeard tears. I'd reached my limit, and that was that. I pasted the smuggest, most condescending look on my face, and I just laughed. I kept laughing, turning on my heel and walking away from him, toward the beach, and responded over my shoulder, "I wouldn't date you if you're the last man on earth, so just drop it. I will never be attracted to you." I then promptly swam out to join Lilith in the middle of the lake. She'd been popping underwater here and there, so she hadn't caught what had happened, but she definitely noticed Wolfbeard's behavior. This giant man-baby had walked over to one of the old picnic tables on the beach and had strewn his form across the top of the table. He laid stomach down, his face buried in his arms, and his form shook as though he were weeping. When she asked me what was wrong and what had happened, I finally stopped holding back. Everything I'd been feeling for the past months and had been holding back from saying just came pouring out in a vicious amalgamation of venom and spite. I told her how he had just groped my back and asked me out again when she was out of earshot before going into a full-blown tirade. I didn't know if we were far out enough for him to hear us or not, but at this point I did not care. I said how unattractive I found him, how hypocritical that he was an obese slob, yet only lusted after women way above his level, and paid no mind to, or was even downright nasty about girls who were actually in his league. about how he constantly stank, never brushed his teeth, and put zero effort into his own appearance while somehow fancying him as God's gift to womankind. I said how sick I was of him just bullshitting stories for attention, and how pathological liars repulsed me. I even let myself swing way below the belt and said that I really hated werewolves and thought that they were the lamest of all paranormal creatures and would by far rather date a vampire if given the choice. I was going in for the kill and I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself. Are we sure he's not a Bigfoot? Neckbeards do make a fine Bigfoot. You can check out the Weeb Squatch tale for that one. Just search ReddX Weeb Squatch, and there it is. Well, apparently Wolfbeard could still hear us from our position out in the middle of the lake, because at the mention of the word vampire and my apparent willingness to bang one of those blood-sucking chads, he got up from the table and stormed off into the woods, howling in a mixture of sorrow and rage, and scaring the absolute shit out of the poor little girls building a sandcastle nearby. For the briefest moment, I felt a little regret and guilt, but the feeling of relief that I got from finally saying everything that had been on my mind was way too strong. Lilith looked a little sad and worried for him as he ran off, but ultimately didn't reprimand me for my outburst. She understood how I had been feeling, and despite wanting to help Wolfbeard, she agreed that his lack of respect towards my boundaries was just unacceptable. So we simply ignored his little outburst for attention. It wasn't raining, so there weren't any mud puddles for him to lodge himself into. So we swam the day away, and it was lovely. We had a blast, swimming in the lake, pushing each other off the dock, and enjoying a picnic on the beach. I had completely forgotten about Wolfbeard until the sun began to set, and we started packing up and still had not seen a sign of him. While we carried our things back to the car, Lilith called his cell phone. No answer. Oh well, he can stay here. Okay, that's how I felt, but Lilith was actually a little worried, so after loading the car, I opted to wait in the passenger seat while she headed back into the park to find him. She had her phone out and tried calling him again, and as she walked away, speaking quickly into the phone, I assumed that she had finally gotten an answer. About 20 minutes passed, and I had lost my patience. As I prepared to call Lilith and ask her to come back and just leave him, I spotted two figures moving out of the trail. The sun was nearly set by now, and I was just ready to go home. Wolfbeard refused to make eye contact with me as he climbed into the back seat of the car. Lilith looked at me apologetically while she hopped into the driver's seat. With a sigh, she addressed me. Calamity, the things you said really hurt Wolfbeard's feelings. I sighed. I did have the tiniest pang of guilt from being so harsh. I realized by now that he must have finally made the connection that I was absolutely never going to date him, so there would be no harm in extending an olive branch. I don't know about that, bro. But nevertheless, she straightened up and spoke. I'm sorry for saying such harsh things. I was angry because I felt like my wishes were not being respected. I won't ever be that cruel to you again. I just want you to understand that I don't want you to keep trying to make me date you. Wolfbeard, of course, did not respond with an apology of his own. He simply continued to stare out the window and only sighed deeper. His running off into the forest didn't attract my pity and attention like he had hoped, so now he could only pout. He sighed again and muttered under his breath,
One day I'll find my princess, and she'll be the happiest woman on earth. I don't know why pretty girls always have to be such bitches when nice guys are just trying to compliment them. It's always the same.
At this point, any pity that I had for him once again flew out the window, and the hateful Amazon returned to my spirit once more, smiling wickedly at the thought of further crushing the will of this pitiful specimen. If he was going to keep carrying on back there about what a bitch I was for not hooking up with him, I would show him the full depths of my bitchiness for the evening. For the remainder of the ride home, I completely ignored the presence of Wolfbeard. Instead, over the whole 2-hour drive, I spoke excitedly to Lilith about all the metal and punk band members that I just found so sexy. How well-groomed men with a dark and alternative aesthetic were just such eye candy to me, and how I'd love to get my hands on a big beefy man with carved muscles and a perfect jawline. Ooh! I'm pretty sure Lilith knew what I was up to because she started to raise her eyebrow at me and would shoot a disapproving look as I crooned on about all the features that I loved in men that Wolfbeard decidedly did not have. Sensing that Lilith was getting tired of this and wanted me to change subjects, I went to sneak in one last jab to just try and top this whole thing with a cherry. I brought up another guy friend that I had met online and mentioned the huge crush I had on him at the time and how I thought that he was into me too. I loudly debated whether or not I should go for it despite the distance. I mean, I've never liked long-distance relationships, but I made sure to announce that I might be willing to make an obsession because, damn, this man was just so hot. Never in my life have I laid it on so thick, even to this day. It was so out of character, it's literally like an out-of-body experience thinking back on it. Needless to say, this jab hit. I could feel the cloud of his furious aura looming the rest of the ride back. He neither spoke nor sighed the entire time, simply looked out the window and occasionally shot daggers toward the back of my head. I'd finally done it. I'd finally gotten off his radar. I was no longer a pure,
innocent milady in search of my knight in shining fedora.
No, I was clearly now a whorish witch, leading on this poor loyal werewolf until I could fly away with Vampire Chad, spitting on all the nice guys below as we fled into the night. My ordeal was finally over, or at least that's what I thought. You see, I underestimated the vindictiveness of a beard scorned. Wolfbeard had become entirely obsessed with me over the last few months, so much so that he couldn't stand the thought of me being happy in someone else's arms. If I wouldn't be happy with him, then I wouldn't be happy at all, and he would try his damnedest to make this a reality. But, you know the drill. That's a whole different story for a whole nother time. Join me again for the thrilling conclusion in the final chapter of Wolfbeard next time. I'll see you guys later. Stay safe and avoid those
Vampire Chads.
They're the worst kinds. Am I the only one out there that, like, dislikes Lilith? When she's first introduced, she's like, yeah, come on, OP, let's go into the Neckbeard nest and have a laugh. And then she just sits there horrified. And then she's bringing this Neckbeard along on trips. That's like the same thing that got OP to start really disliking Miss Piggy. Can't you put two and two together? She's a squish, you know, she got a soft heart. I understand that. My wife is like that. She offers way too much pity to people who honestly don't deserve it, in my opinion. And this Neckbeard is, of course, just heaping on the manipulation because it seems to work. It's just, so frustrating to watch. Honestly, I think that OP probably should have eviscerated Wolfbeard like this in the first story, and then this whole shit would be over, but then we wouldn't have the Wolfbeard saga now, would we? I'm excited to see what happens when you've scorned a Neckbeard. At the end of the day, Lilith is not the real villain of this story. It is obviously Wolfbeard. It just picks at me that she's willing to give somebody who has so clearly demonstrated that he's not worthy of second chances a second chance. But perhaps she didn't know that at the time, you know. I ain't in her head or nothing. But let us hope now that the fall of Wolfbeard is absolutely glorious. It's been a great story up until this point, but it all hinges on the ending. So let's get into it. The Fall of Wolfbeard, Final Chapter. Hello, dear friends. It is bittersweet to announce that this is the final chapter in the Wolfbeard saga. I thank you all sincerely for the amazing support and feedback. It's been a wild and greatly therapeutic experience. However, don't be too sad if you are hoping for more Wolfbeard adventures. I'll shortly begin writing another epic saga, the Miss Piggy Chronicles. And where there's Miss Piggy, Wolfbeard is sure to rear his fearsome neck waddle. For all the questions that I raised in this series that never got answered, be prepared, because soon you will know everything. Probably lots of things that you wish you'd never have to know too, but that's exactly the kind of pain that you masochists come here for, right? You got me pegged. Not literally pegged. I don't like that kind. No, never mind. So, don't be sad. I'll see you again on our next great adventure, but for now, let's send off the mighty Wolfbeard saga with the craziest twists and turns yet, and some good, old-fashioned retribution. When we last followed our mighty lupine hero, he had been gravely wounded by the dark and cruel Milady. No, she was no longer a Milady. She was now
an evil slut who dared to crush the heart of the nicest gentle sir in existence.
All to feed her own sadistic appetite. How could she turn down such a fine creature? Epitome of alpha, a true apex of humanity. It must be dark, evil powers, the likes of which he feared to comprehend. Clearly it was witchcraft, and I, the witch, must be punished for my crimes. And that is what he proceeded to do for the next 2 weeks. Apparently my harsh rejection of him had hit way harder than I had thought. Again, I'll admit, I wasn't very nice to him at the lake. I probably could have left it at, I'm not the slightest bit attracted to you and never will be. I will never date you and your behavior is repulsive to me. That's slightly lighter, yeah. He was clearly coddled since childhood and wasn't used to not getting his way, so it was already massively upsetting to him. His ego had been badly bruised just by my forceful rejection alone, and my vengeful tirade in the middle of the lake likely did nothing more than add salt into the wound. But I was so full of fury from months of politely and gently telling him that I wasn't interested and being blatantly ignored and continually harassed that I lost control. And let's be honest, it's freaking hilarious that out of everything nasty that I said, it was my preference of vampires to werewolves that cut him the deepest. Like, holy damn, buddy. Wow. Anyways, I had hurt his feelings so badly that I had finally destroyed his obsession with me. However, with WOLFBEARD, apparently, if he couldn't have me, he was damn well determined to just destroy me. His ego needed something to help it recover, and that would be the perfect way. Of course, with his gross infatuation with me finally over, he wasted no time in finding a new target. And the next lucky recipient of his obsession was Lilith! See, since she had been so kind to him, and had even defended him to me a few times, he had taken to seeing her as a pure being of light. Never mind the little boyfriend problem. After all, in the weeks prior, things had been looking rocky. What luck to be there just in time to benefit from her emotional turmoil. And so WOLFBEARD set his evil plans into motion. Plans that would rock our entire friend group for the next 2 weeks, and almost destroyed it entirely. But you know what they say about weaving a web of lies? Eventually, you will get tangled. And boy, was the aftermath ugly for him. The first thing at the top of WOLFBEARD's checklist was to begin driving a wedge between Lilith and I. He had already done all the groundwork in gaining her sympathy, so he knew what angle to play in turning her on me. And he could already tell that I was frustrated with the way that she would baby and defend him, so his wicked little mind knew exactly what to do on my end as well. The few times that I spoke with Lilith were rather tense. He had called her more than once in the wee hours of the morning, sobbing about
how the things I told him made him want to kill himself.
And that he was
already so emotionally weak from his parents and Miss Piggy's emotional abuse, and my words were just too much.
As a result, she was rather short with me, getting irritated and snapping whenever I'd mention WOLFBEARD in a bad light. After one particularly tense day, she lost it with me, finally telling me the reason that he was so broken and acted so badly. She told me all about the abuse his parents and Miss Piggy had caused him to endure, and that I was only making it worse, and I was being extremely selfish, driving him to want to kill himself. This was extremely shocking to me. I'd met his parents before, and as previously mentioned, they were not wicked people. They doted on WOLFBEARD and spoiled him rotten, and Miss Piggy, for all her flaws, was still head over heels for that sack of shit. She was never anything less than 100% willing to do anything in her power to please him, even at her own expense. My response was to call him on his bullshit. I tried telling Lilith about what a pathological liar WOLFBEARD is, how he had made up his entire abusive childhood for pity points, and that though Miss Piggy was controlling, he was also lying about her. This was the breaking point for Lilith. Now, before I go any further, let me be clear here. You may think Lilith foolish and gullible, and even a terrible friend for the things that she did over the course of this saga, Believe me, I've seen a few comments being highly critical of these points. But what you need to understand is that what is actually logical doesn't always seem to be logical to abuse survivors. I talked to her recently and told her about how I was transcribing our experiences into stories, and she gave me permission to delve deeper into her own traumas so you all can have not only a deeper understanding of why things happen the way that they did in the story, but also to help those unfamiliar with the effects of trauma and irrational behaviors and reactions it can cause, can perhaps learn more about it and better understand other survivors that they may encounter in their own lives. Ooh, now this is real science. We get into it. See, I briefly mentioned that Lilith had gone through a lot in her past, and not wanting to overstep, I left it at that. But the truth is, the reason Lilith was so susceptible to WOLFBEARD's lies was because she had very, and I mean very recently, gotten out of a terrible situation, and it was all still fresh in her mind. WOLFBEARD said that
his childhood was emotionally and mentally abusive.
And that really hit the mark because Lilith's childhood genuinely was. To put it frankly, her parents never wanted her, and they had never been shy about letting her know. Anytime anything went wrong, they'd find some way to blame her, even as a young child. Things only got worse when her babysitter came along. This time her parents were actually trying, so this baby was the anointed, wanted one. Lilith's childhood was filled with neglect, all the while seeing her little sister spoiled rotten and showered with love and affection that she so desperately wanted but was just never given. This caused her to start acting out in her teen years, desperate for scraps of attention, even if it was negative, but her parents genuinely just did not care. They let her drift, and it was up to a literal child to realize that her life was more than the choices that she was making, and to help get herself clean and out of contact with the bad influences that she had befriended, hoping for attention that would never come. Mind you, they never hit her, but I promise you, being told that you should have been aborted and that the divorce was entirely your fault and that you're a failure and always will be, hurts just as bad and lasts for far longer. And as is the case with most victims of abuse, they tend to attract more abusers. A slew of boyfriends that beat, assaulted, and controlled her left Lilith extremely timid and agreeable to whatever men told her to be true, as questioning their authority in any way, more often than not, led to brutal punishment. Sorry to darken the mood by dropping this on y'all, but I'm sure by now that you're starting to see a clearer picture as to how Lilith was so easily convinced by WOLFBEARD. Not only had she been classically conditioned to not question what a man told her to be fact, or else suffer the consequences, but this man actually seemed to be very kind and gentle to her, and he seemed to understand some of what she had been through since she had grown up in a traumatic environment. Lilith wore a ferocious exterior, but during this time she was actually very broken inside. And by me calling him another abuse survivor, a liar, I was essentially calling her a liar too, and that was something that Lilith would not accept. What really burns me up to this day is how truly depraved WOLFBEARD must have been. What kind of sick bastard can listen to someone open up about horrific traumas that they've endured and then lie to them right to their face, making up fairy tales about events that never happened to them so as to earn their pity or even worse, prey on them? I'm sure there's a term for people like him, but I haven't yet thought of one foul enough. Anyways, now that that's in the air, let's move on. So after a heated discussion with Lilith, where she refused to believe me when I told her that WOLFBEARD was a dirty liar, we kinda stopped speaking for a while. At this point in time, she had not been ready to share the entirety of the abuse that she had suffered with me, so I wasn't aware of the complex reasoning that was going on her end. I was extremely frustrated with her for being what I saw as gullible, and willfully turning a blind eye to defend an absolute pig. And of course, for all the reasons that I previously listed, she saw me as being super hurtful and insensitive to abuse survivors, and in turn, was frustrated with me. WOLFBEARD, of course, reveled in the tension that he was creating. He began spending more and more time with Lilith, claiming that his situation was growing more dire. Right around this time, Lilith and her boyfriend at the time had finally broken up, which had only added to the cocktail of distress that she was dealing with. And WOLFBEARD was madly giddy over the prospect of moving in like a scavenger. Lilith had also made it clear to him multiple times that she was not interested, but we all know how well WOLFBEARD takes to a gentle decline to his offer, so of course he didn't drop it. Seeing Lilith's current state from our breakup and her tension with me, WOLFBEARD decided to see how far he could push it. I'm guessing that the way he saw it, since I was disgusted by him, so long as I was friends with Lilith, she'd be influenced by me and reject him. So end of story, I had to go. He began having tear-jerking conversations with Lilith about how he believed I was aiming to destroy his life, how I was mad that she was spending time with him despite me disliking him, and as a result had started a bullying campaign against him. Yep, according to old Wolfie, I was manipulating all of our mutual friends and family members, even all of our online friends, into hating him. I was spreading lies about him and telling everyone to say nasty things to him and ignore him, and how all the stress of this was making him want to hurt himself more than ever. All absurd fantasies, of course, but it only deepened the rift. Meanwhile, he still had other elements to juggle, so the manipulation did not end there. To make sure that I didn't eventually catch on and talk sense into Lilith, and finally make her understand the truth, he had to make me just as mad at her as she was with me, so any attempts at communication would cease. So that's when he started feeding select information and lies to Miss Piggy, whom I was still on fairly good terms with. He knew that she would pass the information along to me, and that I'd automatically distrust anything that came directly from him, but would lend some consideration to Miss Piggy. He couldn't have me questioning too hard as to why exactly Lilith was so irritated with me, so he definitely planned ahead for this. WOLFBEARD fed Miss Piggy misinformation about the nature of Lilith's anger towards me. According to him, Lilith was livid with me for not giving WOLFBEARD a chance and dating him. This made Miss Piggy furious. Even though they had called off the engagement, she still loved WOLFBEARD, and the idea of Lilith, one of her least favorite people, spending a bunch of alone time with her beloved, and seemingly trying to sabotage her desire to get back together with him by hooking him up with others, was maddening to her. And of course, this pissed me off a great deal because I felt betrayed. I told Lilith countless times how uncomfortable WOLFBEARD made me, and to know that she had been trying to go against my wishes and force me together with him behind my back was unthinkable. So by this point, Lilith and I were no longer speaking, and I didn't even know if I could still consider her a friend. Now that that vile task was out of the way, WOLFBEARD moved on to the next step in Operation Acquire Goth Girlfriend 2.0. Knowing full well of Lilith's less than flattering thoughts on Miss Piggy, and Miss Piggy's mutual dislike, he decided to use this to his advantage. He began to play a new and more intense angle for pity. He began to tell Lilith that Miss Piggy had begun to physically abuse him. He said he was scared of her and couldn't stand living with her any longer, but his only alternative was moving back home with his oh-so-cruel parents. And because of this, he was going to need even more emotional support and time spent with Lilith than ever before if he was going to survive. Now, before y'all ask just how the heck he managed to convince Lilith beyond a doubt that he was actually moving back home, let me tell you the depths of this psycho's plotting. He straight up packed up a bunch of his stuff into boxes and had Lilith help him come move them back to his parents' house while Miss Piggy was away at work. He deadass went through that much trouble for a lie. So now let me recap all of the puppet strings beginning to tangle for you. He had Lilith mad at me for bullying him, and me mad at Lilith for backstabbing me, and Miss Piggy furious with Lilith about all the extra time that they were spending together. To defuse the latter, he swore to Miss Piggy that he wasn't hanging out with Lilith anymore to respect her discomfort. Instead, he would lie to her every time that he met up with Lilith, telling her that his dad had called him back into work. It seemed the only one who hadn't been pulled into this madness was Doe. Valor was too, but she was mercifully back on the other side of the state for school and managed to avoid this whole mess. WOLFBEARD didn't know how to go about manipulating Doe. She had no pre-standing biases or tensions for him to take advantage of, and she had remained neutral in all of this and was still friends with everyone. And this would prove to be WOLFBEARD's undoing. Good old Doe. He decided to try playing both sides by telling her that Lilith was mad at me for being nasty to him, and that little innocent him couldn't understand why I was mad at Lilith when it was me being such a big meatyhead after all. He told her about how much time he'd been spending with Lilith, and not to tell Miss Piggy because he knew that she didn't like Lilith and he didn't want to upset her. He had anticipated and planned for a lot. But he hadn't thought of one factor. Everyone he was speaking to separately, talking to each other, and realizing that it didn't add up. One evening, about 2 weeks after the tension had started, Doe and I met up at Miss Piggy's to hang out. As much as I was disgusted by Wolfbeard, I'd resigned myself to just kind of accepting his presence at Miss Piggy's. And other than sad looks, he had finally started leaving me alone. While he was in the shower and Miss Piggy was cooking something on the one cleared off stovetop, Doe and I chatted in the front room. A while into the visit, Doe asked me why I was mad at Lilith, since Wolfbeard had failed to come up with an explanation for this. I told her it was because Lilith had been trying to hook me up with Wolfbeard behind my back, and that had broken my trust. I was surprised to see Doe's baffled expression. She processed my answer for a moment before interjecting. Wait, she was what? That's not what Wolfbeard told me. He said she was mad at you for trying to get a bunch of people to bully him and be nasty to him. What? I practically yelped. I was flabbergasted by this. I mean, sure, I'd been a bit mean at the lake, but that hardly counts as launching a bullying campaign, and I told Doe as much. At this point, something smelled really fishy. My anger with Lilith had begun to melt away once I realized that the whole thing had likely been a scheme set up by Wolfbeard, but I knew that the only way to fully clear things up would be to just talk it out. But if Wolfbeard had her convinced that I was relentlessly abusing him, there's no way in hell that she'd answer my call, or even believe me for that matter, without solid physical proof to show her. It was at this point that we began to brainstorm. Doe mentioned how Wolfbeard was planning on meeting with Lilith that night, and that perhaps she could tag along and try to get a moment alone with Lilith that evening. However, at the mention of plans for the evening, Miss Piggy's radar finally sprung into action, pinging her rapidly into the living room.
What do you mean Wolfbeard is meeting up with Lilith tonight? He told me he was done spending time with her. He's going in for an extra shift at work tonight so he can afford to take me out to a nice dinner.
Miss Piggy cut in defensively. At this, the remaining missing pieces fell into place, and Doe and I hatched an evil plan to ensnare the vile werewolf in a den of his own lies. Upon realizing that Miss Piggy was also being fed a different story, we decided to push her into action. We explained just how much time Wolfbeard had been spending with Lilith, and that he had been lying all along about going into work. It turned out that he had been using this excuse quite a lot. She was livid, not with Wolfbeard of course, but with Lilith. With a bit of prodding, Miss Piggy stormed off in a violent fervor. She charged into the bedroom and was out a moment later, Wolfbeard's cell phone in her hand. Apparently he was still in the shower and had left it on the bed. I will always be amazed at Wolfbeard's ability to take longer showers than a woman, but still come out smelling like body odor and cheese. And cheese. I suppose he must think that water alone is enough and avoids actual soap.
I don't want to wash away my pheromones.
This was back in the day of flip phones, and before Wolfbeard was smart enough to password protect. So in seconds, Miss Piggy was speeding through all of his interactions with Lilith over the past 2 weeks. Apparently he had listed her number as
Jim, a work associate.
But Miss Piggy had always been a bit suspicious, since it seemed like Wolfbeard was spending a whole lot of time chatting with Jim, always with a dreamy expression no less. As she scrolled, she turned deeper and darker shades of fuchsia. Unable to stop herself, and Doe and I choosing not to intervene, Miss Piggy sent her own message to Lilith. Given the length and fervorous speed at which she typed, we assumed that it was less than pleasant. In short, she called Lilith a homewrecker and demanded that she leave Wolfbeard alone, that they were working things out and that he loved her. Moments later, Lilith responded. Now it was her turn to be angry. She called Miss Piggy abusive and said that Wolfbeard hated her and had told her so, and that's why he moved out and never wanted to see her again. Miss Piggy about lost her fucking mind at this. She assured Lilith that Wolfbeard was not only still living with her, but also still
intimate
with her. In turn, Lilith called her a liar and said that she had helped Wolfbeard move out, so she knew for a fact that he was done with her. This was the last straw for Miss Piggy. Not only was Lilith saying things that conflicted with the story she so desperately clung to, but she claimed to have been in her home despite Miss Piggy forbidding it. Unable to restrain herself, Miss Piggy pulled a power move. Crashing back into the bedroom, Miss Piggy then took a picture of the bathroom, showcasing Wolfbeard's filthy, discarded clothes, his toiletries on the counter, and of course his grotesque silhouette behind the shower curtain in plain view. She then proceeded to send it to Lilith, jabbing, "Does this look like he moved out and he's avoiding me to you? He's naked in my house right now!" However, all this commotion finally caught Wolfbeard's attention. After hurriedly exiting the shower and dressing himself in a fresh wolf-themed t-shirt, he spotted Miss Piggy with his phone. And he went ballistic. He grabbed her by the shoulders and screamed in her face. I genuinely thought that he was going to hit her when he went to raise a hand, but remembering Doe and I being present, he settled for punching the door and howling in rage. At this, Doe and I protectively yanked Miss Piggy away from him and prepared to throw down if he tried anything. But before it could escalate to that, his phone began to ring. Oh boy! Seeing that it was Lilith's number, he was fast to answer and tear off into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Despite this, we could hear everything loud and clear. He put on his most pathetic voice and begged for a chance to explain himself. But it was too late. Lilith had finally put the pieces together and was beyond forgiveness. We could hear her screaming through the speaker clear from the other side of the door. She shouted that if he could so easily lie about his supposed abuse with Miss Piggy, then he could just as easily lie to her about the other abuse. And anyone lying about abuse of any kind for attention was a mortal sin in Lilith's eyes. And it was all the more personal because she had defended his lying ass against friends. Just like that, one simple photo had completely broken her trust and brought about a wrath that made my outburst at the lake seem like a gentle pat on the head. I couldn't hear it all because of the seemingly endless onslaught sort of merged together from the distance of where I stood, but I heard enough to know Wolfbeard would not easily recover. Terms like hideous, disgusting, repulsive, and pathetic rebounded through the air, and as if telepathically responding to my mental, "Finish him," she went in for the kill. The reason women don't want to date you isn't because they're cruel and picking on you, Wolfbeard. You're a disgusting, arrogant liar that's so truly worthless that he has to make shit up to get scraps of pity attention. You constantly salivate over women way outside your league, but you're a gross slob that's not even like a 3 out of 10 on a generous day. No beautiful woman will ever love you because you're disgusting, both inside and out. So you might as well stay with Miss Piggy, since that's all you're ever going to get. The resounding silence after Lilith hung up on him was so intense that I had to excuse myself. On the way out to my car, I got a massive text message from Lilith. She was overwhelmed by everything she had just learned, and was terrified that our friendship had been destroyed over what ultimately amounted to nothing more than a man-baby's temper tantrum. She begged that I meet up with her for dinner at a Denny's that night, and talk through everything that had happened. And since I also didn't want our long-standing friendship to die over one vile neckbeard, I agreed. That evening was a wild emotional roller coaster. Right from the moment Lilith spotted me in the parking lot, she ran over and hugged me, sobbing. And just like that, any remaining irritation I had with her flew right out the window, and I started the waterworks too. Funny how Denny seems to be the place where a lot of weird stuff happens. You just sort of end up there, really. And no matter the wild situation, they're used to it. We walked in, still sniffling and hugging, and the hostess and other diners didn't even bat an eye. Honestly, we did way more talking than eating. We discussed everything that had happened on our various ends during the 2 weeks that we hadn't spoken. It was blatantly obvious just how much Wolfbeard had been manipulating us and poisoning us against each other. At this point, all of our anger with each other evaporated and was refined and redirected solely at Wolfbeard. He may have thought himself an evil mastermind about to get away with the biggest scheme of all time completely scot-free, but it all horrifically imploded around him in the blink of an eye. And believe me, he felt the consequences. Over the next few days, not a single mutual friend of our entire social circle was unaware of his actions. He had found himself completely excommunicated, a total pariah, and his decimated ego took another great hit when he was actually forced to move back home with his parents. Miss Piggy was too hurt by the Lilith incident. She demanded that he leave, and In that, he seemingly lost his greatest ally and defender. No one but his
abusive mother
remains to coddle him like an innocent little baby and ensure him that those big bad meanies were just picking on him and that he did nothing wrong. Even his online refuge, where he could hide behind the safety of a hot, buff anime character as a deceptive icon, was tainted by his actions. He was booted from my group chat, which he had pressured me into adding him into, and almost no one would dare speak to him again. Both Lilith and I did not mince words when we explained to the group why he was banned. We made it quite clear that he was a deeply deranged individual who not only consistently sexually harassed every woman that he got within 10 feet of, but that he was also manipulative and toxic, and because of this we were no longer comfortable keeping any kind of contact with him. Just like that, he was instantaneously ghosted by just about every contact that he previously had. Harsh as it might be, don't pity the beard. He brought about his own downfall. Absolutely. Besides, aren't werewolves supposed to be
solitary creatures?
Poor fool. Should have sided with the bloodsuckers. At least they have elaborate underworld societies. Anyways, after the aftermath of the WOLFBEARD experience settled, our friendship survived. As of writing this, 5 years have gone by since these events came to pass, and in that time we have grown older and wiser. Lilith and I are no longer the same innocent and easy to emotionally manipulate college girls. Time and experience has made us far less patient beings, and I cannot begin to emphasize how much less shit we are willing to put up with today. I guarantee you all that if this were to happen today, it wouldn't even be able to start, because I would have cut WOLFBEARD down the second he started being creepy and gone on with my life, because I haven't the time or energy to deal with trifles. Lilith is also much more difficult to take advantage of emotionally now. She's long since made peace with her past and is in a pretty good place. She's also in a very healthy relationship with an amazing guy that is living proof that the good ones are indeed out there amongst all the trash. But as an unfortunate result of WOLFBEARD's utter foolery, she now has a hairpin trigger for trifling and will come for your life if you even hint at playing with her, so watch out. Anyways, our entire friend group has withstood the test of time. Lilith, Doe, Valor, and I are all still dear friends to this day, minus the exception of Miss Piggy, but for you to understand that, you'd need to understand the darkness that she'd been hiding from us all this time. Ooh. You'd also need to understand WOLFBEARD's desperate attempts for retaliation and trying to save face amongst the shame, but for that, another story alone just simply isn't enough. No, we'll need to begin a whole new saga. And that, friends, is where we'll pick up on our new adventures. I'll see you again as we embark on our newest gauntlet, the Miss Piggy Chronicles. But until then, farewell, my friends, and thank you for joining me on this journey. May your necks be clean-shaven and your werewolf hunts bountiful. Godspeed, my chads and my ladies. Godspeed. So I guess making WOLFBEARD a pariah is like a decent ending to things. I would have preferred something a bit more visceral, you know? Something that really cut him down. Not like, you know, death or injury, but maybe just having him live on the streets for a little bit. You can out him to his parents as a manipulative asshole. Then again, they'll probably, you know, never hear anything ill said of their boy. You're like, here's all the proof, and they're like, yeah, whatever. So it seems like you did the best that you could, and I mean, given all that has happened, yeah, I would just be glad to see this beard out of my life in any way possible. I do like how it ended. Again, I prefer the Adelaide saga. Now that is a revenge picture worth telling about. But the WOLFBEARD saga is, you know, a finely crafted house of cards, and it was fun to see it falling down. This Neckbeard honestly acts a lot more like a legbeard. The level of just manipulation is absolutely uncanny. You rarely see that in beards, you know? For as intelligent as they find themselves, they're often too dumb to manage something of this scale. He knew all the right buttons to push, and boy, did he push them. The only unfortunate part is that one neutral friend that gets them all talking, and then boom. Boom goes the dynamite. but I definitely hope you guys enjoyed the saga. I've been recording for such a long time. It's probably going to be up on Monday instead of Sunday. I said the weekend, but I need a day to edit this or so. But I told you it would come, and it definitely did. Although next time I'll probably break it up over a couple of days. But anyways, I hope that you'll like, comment, and or subscribe for the effort alone. Pretty please. Maybe share the video around since it is a giant one. You can give people a taste of them neckbeards. Also, don't forget to check out the links in the description. We got my wife's channel, my personal subreddit, my other media channel that I never use. There's all kinds of good stuff down there, so do check it out. And of course, you're seeing some names on the screen. Those are my gorgeous, wonderful, beautiful, generous patrons, and I would like to thank all of them, but specifically Lady Nix, Robert Waits, Pope Squid, Rebecca H, Cider Drinker, Tato Ferret, The Last Shinobi, Mark 211, Michael Undead, Aaron W, Mitch, John Hero, Josh K, Candy Sora, DGNZ, Kalakas, and our newest patron, what the fuck is that? Nero? Something like that. I'm gonna ask him on Discord. But anyways, friends, if you can support monetarily, of course, that is massively, massively appreciated. But if you can't right now, don't worry too much about it. The views is what really matters. That's how I keep my beard buttered. So I thank you for watching along with me today, and I hope that you'll come on back and watch again tomorrow. Although the story will not be this beefy. In order to do so, you're going to need to keep yourself safe out there. Wash your hands all the time. Super important. But also take some time out and do something that you personally enjoy today. Something just for yourself. Because you are loved, you are worthy, and you definitely, definitely deserve it. I will see you in the next one, friends. And until then, bye-bye.